Good. Well, I'm very delighted to welcome everyone this evening. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. This is our first program of our 52nd season, and so we're very excited about having it start out tonight with this presentation. Probably most people are familiar with the Historical Society. We're located at the top of the Catterskill Clove. Oh, I think I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Adrienne Laris, the president of the Historical Society. And our mission is to discover, preserve, interpret, and share the unique history of the Catskill Mountain region. We have a 50-acre campus. We are the home of the 1913 Ulster and Delaware train station on the National and State Historic Registries. We have an archive that contains some 7,000 artifacts. We're the western trailhead of the Catterskill Rail Trail.
Hello,
and
Hi
it
there.
leads
How's it
past
going?
our
Rich
train
is,
station all the way
I
out
let
to
him
the
in,
viewing
but it looks
platform for the
like
Catterskill Falls.
it's still joining. I'm not sure
A
why
full
it's
list of
taking
our
so
programs for 2025 will be available
long.
on
There
our
we go.
website as soon as the details are set.
How many
We're
people are
working on
signed
that
up now?
You can also
Still
check
11.
us out
No
on
new
Facebook
signups,
and
but I sent
Instagram
out,
for
but
postings and
everyone
updates
has
as well.
the link.
I'd like to extend a special
So
thank you
they
to
could just
the
come
Mountaintop
in.
Historical Society
Anybody
members who are
can. Yeah, I put it on the
participating
website.
this
I put it on
evening.
Facebook.
Our
so
members are important
I
partners in the work of the Mountaintop Historical
I
Society.
sent the board a reminder.
I'd also like to thank the
I sent
Bank of
them all a
Greene
link
County for
already.
their support of our program
when I sent it out to
and
everybody.
Stewart
Yeah.
Shops for
Will we
supporting
be able to see
digital
who
access
will
to
I
this
be able to
program.
see who the participants are?
Tonight,
I'm
in
gonna just
honor of
make
Black
you
History Month, we are
a
pleased to present
co-host.
the Harlem Hell
Okay.
Fighters from the North Country, a talk by Richard
Yes.
Sears Walling.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
The Harlem Hell
Yes, we can
Fighters
hear
were
you.
an
Can't see you
Okay,
yet.
African-American
I'm trying
infantry
to
regiment
get my
in the
camera
New
on
York
in just
Army
a moment.
National Guard
Okay.
during World War I and World War
Hold
II.
on.
The story of the local men of the Harlem Hell
there I am.
Fighters, the most
Okay.
famous regiment
Okay,
of the American
All right.
Army during World
There we
War
go.
I, will be shared tonight.
So,
In addition to better known
we get any
heroes
more than
such
11?
as Sergeant Henry Johnson,
We have. I mean, the
of
whole board.
Albany,
Our whole
there
board
were
has
men from our area, including
has the
Sergeants
link, so I'm
Carl
sure
and
there's going to be
Harrison
more than
Vroman
11.
of Schoharie
okay, I'm just
and
seeing
James
how I frame.
Jamieson of
There we go.
Saratoga Springs.
Okay,
The regiment went overseas
Right.
in 1917
So,
with an original
Are we ready
complement of
for Rich
2,200
to
men
load up his
and 76
thing, or should we wait
officers, and
a bit,
returned
or
in
just go?
1919 with
I'm sorry?
1,200 men
Should
and 35 officers
Rich
of that
load
group.
up his
Their
presentation?
heroism in
Yeah, I
France
mean, you can
earned them
start
the
if you
immortal
want.
Share screen,
nickname,
etc.
the
okay,
Harlem Hell
I'm gonna hit
Fighters.
share.
Okay.
I'd like to now introduce
Let's just make sure it really does
Mr.
work.
Walling. You may be
Exactly,
familiar
yeah,
with him and his
yeah.
background. Last year, he presented a fascinating talk on the Mondor family of Prattsville. He grew up in New Jersey and presently
Okay.
makes his home in Stamford, New
You
York.
guys
He
see
is the
that?
son of 2 World War II
It's
officers
just a black screen.
and a graduate
yeah.
of
Oh, now
Rutgers
I see it.
University.
Now, good. Now
He has
now it's good.
dedicated
Okay,
his
now let me
life
go
to
to
history,
the
historic preservation, and humanitarian
let me go
causes.
to the proper
His primary
control.
work is in African American and Native American history and genealogy. He is the author of numerous books,
Okay,
including
gotta
My
move
Year in
this bar
France,
down
about a
somewhere.
Harlem
There we
Hell
go.
Fighter, and Edward
Okay,
and Eleanor and the
slideshow.
Wages of Sin, about the infamous 1922 double homicide
There's
of a
some
minister
background
and his
noise.
lover
Rich,
in New
is that
Brunswick,
your
New
TV
Jersey.
on or something?
No,
He is
that's
the
me. I'm gonna have
recipient
to
of
move to
honors
another
from the Oliver
location.
Cromwell
Yeah.
Black History
Oh,
Society
it's your.
and the
I'm also
Sons
gonna
of the
mute
American
myself as
Revolution.
soon as
Yeah.
we
Mr.
start.
Walling, if
so,
you
right.
are ready,
Yeah.
please begin.
I hit slideshow. I'm just
Thank you very
waiting
much,
for it
Adrian.
to go.
First of all, I'd like to
here
thank
we
the Historical
go.
Society for inviting me to give this program.
Okay.
I spent a long
Do you
time
see it?
gathering the various facts from
Yes.
various locations. I'd like to thank
Things has to
Jessica
go down.
for helping to coordinate all of the technical work and the other administrative details that go into these types of programs. So let's begin at the beginning.
Okay.
Just by way of personal background, my
How long is your
grandfather, my mom's
presentation?
dad,
I meant to ask you
was in the
Uh,
U.S. Army during
Well,
World
it's
War
about
I, but he
40
did not ship out
slides, but I can
overseas.
like zip through
However,
some,
being a
zip
resident
through
in
some
the
of them,
Albany
you know, with
area,
like
he
a
worked on the
graphics.
Hudson River line in
Are
the
you saying like a
1930s,
slide a minute
40s,
or something?
50s, 60s.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
as
Okay.
a conductor, he
All right.
knew
Well,
Yeah.
and was
so
friends
Jessica
with
or Adrian, if
the
if I'm
porters
like
who worked at the
pushing
station
up
in
against the
Albany.
time when you want me to
And of
stop,
course,
just
many
give
of
me
the porters
give me the
were
high
actually
sign.
veterans, not only of World War
Okay.
I, but also
They're
of
like-
this particular regiment. So through my
Did you see,
familiar connection with my
Team
grandfather,
America,
I do have that relationship to
the
the
people
story
who do
of
South Park
men of
did
the
a
North
puppet
Country
movie about
in the
15
Harlem Hell
years ago.
Fighters.
Oh, no, I didn't
So,
see that.
This is an
America.
image
It's
of
very
a late war
raunchy, but
battle
it's very
scene
funny.
with German soldiers in their stormtrooper
just-
tactics,
Oh, sorry, yeah.
advancing through
Well, I
shot
was just
and
going to
shell.
say that one of
And
the
the painting can only
punchlines
give
was
just as the
you know,
slightest
show a
hint
subtle
of
sign
what
that
war
you
was
need help.
really like.
So the
on
guy
Western
goes like,
front.
"You mean like this?" No,
On the
anyway.
left are French soldiers
Anyway.
with the traditional
So much,
Adrian
so much
helmet,
for subtlety.
firing their
Exactly, right,
version
right.
of the automatic rifle called a show.
I just want to remind
You
you
can see
to the
the,
raise hand button
semicircular clip
is
there.
where it
On the
says
upper right are
reactions at
French
the
soldiers
bottom.
in their horizon blue
Next to the
uniform, a
share
man in a
screen. So
brown
if you click
uniform,
reactions,
which represents
that's the
their
raise
colonial
hand.
troops from North
Next to
Africa,
that will
which
be
consisted
the
of both
chat. So if anyone says
native-born,
something in the chat, it should come
Arabic,
up.
Moroccan,
Okay.
and also
I tilted the
colonial
thing so
settlers
I
of
could
North
take a better
Africa.
look at the screen. So
And then on the
forgive me.
bottom right are
right, I'm just
battlefield
gonna-
dead with crosses of burials
Okay.
right on the battlefield. So it was hell
all
on
right.
earth during World War
Did you
I.
figure out how to get the audio
So
on the
North Country Hell
little film?
Fighters, and
No,
there is our
but-
area with Schoharie
I
and
have it
Albany
queued up on
and
my
Saratoga
phone.
Springs
Okay.
circled.
So
And
I'm just
by
going
way
to
of
jump through it a
background,
little bit
the
because
15th
Yeah.
New York
just people
National
get
Guard
a
Regiment
taste
was
of what
Sure.
combat was like in World War I.
advocated for many
Sure.
years prior to its
It was a
formation.
very, very harsh
The
war.
growing black community
Can
in New
imagine.
York City,
Yeah.
particularly in Harlem.
Oh, I did add
called
another
for,
slide
a unit. The leading men of that
which
community,
I think you'll be
called for
happy
a
with,
unit, including Charles Fillmore,
about a from the
who
Revolution
became
in
a captain
Schoharie.
in this unit.
There was a
And then
black
also
militiaman
transferred to the
named Cornelius
470th
Thibaut.
Regiment later in
Oh.
the
He
war.
married a
The New York
Schoharie
legislation
Indian woman,
languished because there was not
and
a
their
big
descendants were not
interest
only in the Civil War
other
but
than
also
New York
in this
City for
regiment.
such a regiment.
Wow. Oh,
But-
that's cool.
In,
Yeah, very cool.
the
That's
early
great.
part of the 1910s, 1915, 1916. Of course, we had the raids by Pancho Villa along
Well, I
the
remember
Mexican-US
when,
border.
from your talk last
Nothing's
year
ever
about the
new under the
Mondor
sun,
family of
apparently.
Prattsville, it turned out
And
that
many of the New York
Dee
regiments
Dee
went down
Turns
to the
Thorpe, who
border,
was the
and
hunter
it was realized
historian,
that, oh
town of
gosh,
hunter
you don't have
historian.
any
She
other
knew of people
National
who
Guard
were
regiments
related to
in
the
case of
Mondors.
statewide
Right,
emergencies.
right.
And,
And
so
they
the
lived
creation of the 15th
Hunter, Tannersville,
was
or
fast
something like
tracked
that.
at that
So
point. by
I'm wondering if we
1916.
might, find
I
others
only
that-
just mentioned the
Oh,
first
absolutely.
part, they were
Well,
changing demographics.
Not to give the program
New
away,
York
but
State,
Oh, no.
one of
in
the first men to
1890,
die before they
there
shipped
were
out was
6.9
related to the
million
Mondor
whites
family.
and only
Oh, wow.
70,000
Okay.
So
African
I have his
Americans.
information too.
In 1900,
So that's a link, right?
there were
Yes.
9
Yeah,
million
I have his
whites
information
and
as part of this program.
134,000
Excellent.
African Americans.
Yeah, yeah.
Almost double in 10 years.
Very good.
And of course, that was part of the Great
So, by the
Migration.
way,
And then the
just
other
FYI,
details here are just particularly
took
about
me
Manhattan.
a solid
And
day
I will send this
to
program
whittle
as a
and edit all my
PDF to
many
Jessica.
images.
So if anybody
down to
listening this
a,
evening or
a
other members
reasonable
of the
number.
society would like a copy of it,
But
they can contact
that's what
Jessica
historians do.
a few days
Yes,
after
right,
this
yeah.
presentation
You know,
for
It's-
5,000
these
things and they only
slides.
needed 10.
Right. It's tedious and time consuming, but
One of the
you have to
leading
do it.
men
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
The
order-
regiment
in order
was
to
James
not make
Reese
people
Buren.
get all
He
antsy about
was
when
the
is this going to end and
Jay-Z
all
of
that.
his
other-
generation.
Right,
He was
yeah.
the leading
So we have to be mindful of that.
entrepreneurial
So that's
musician
great.
of
Good,
his
very good.
generation in the African American community.
Okay.
So now
And
we
what he
just
said
hang out and
basically
wait.
was,
Now
we're
we just
strangers in
wait.
New
Yeah, we
York.
did
Yeah.
all of our
Joining
homework
the
and our,
regiment will be the means
checking
of
in the other
forming
day. So
comradeship
we,
with some fine
you
young
know,
men of the city.
we're all set to go.
New York is a peculiar city. People
Very
are
good.
clannish,
And I'm going to
and you
try
have
to
a very
read
small
my
chance to meet any of the fine
introduction and
businessmen in the
announcements
city
and all
of
that
our
from,
race.
from my laptop
Skipping
screen
down,
instead of from a paper in front
He
of me.
says towards
So
the end,
I'm going to
about 5
sort of
lines up, the
scooch
unit
that thing
is being
over
promoted by the
so that
biggest
I
men
can
on
read
Wall
it, and
Street.
then I'll just keep
We will eventually have a
scrolling
big
down.
armory
You will
where the
not
young
see
men
it.
can have
You will
healthful
not see it,
exercise,
but-
swimming swimming pools, athletic
Yes.
training, which
Well,
will build up
we're
the
only
manhood
human.
of Harlem.
Yeah,
To accomplish
right.
these results, the best
Oh.
and most sincere, energetic men in the community
must get
Okay.
in the mood.
So at 3
And
o'clock
he ought to know
tomorrow
because
morning,
he was called the Jazz
Yes.
I take
King.
my daughter and my grandkids from Stamford,
When
New
America
York,
went to
to
war,
Arlington
particularly
National
after the sinking of
Cemetery,
the Lusitania in
Oh,
1915,
a 6.5-hour drive.
we declared
Yes.
war against Germany in
My
April of
mom's
1917.
youngest brother,
Black Americans
Jim
rallied to the
Sears,
flag as they had done in all
retired
previous
as an
wars,
admiral in the Navy,
particularly the Civil War.
and he
and
passed
the
away about
Spanish-American
6 months
War.
ago.
Oh,
And of
wow.
course, they
Uh-huh.
were just waiting for the right time of year to be buried at
the
Arlington.
American flag.
So
The,
that's tomorrow.
Oh, how, no,
leader
that's
and
really
editor
wonderful. It's just,
of
I
the
have made
NAACP,
my first
W.E.B.
trip
Du
to
Bois,
Arlington ever,
basically said in his
2
famous
summers
crisis
ago,
speech,
and I was
Oh,
just,
wow.
that this is the
I was
crisis of the world.
just blown away.
And
And it just
he,
so happened
in
while
this
I was there,
editorial,
my
he
cousin lives in
urges
the
the Black
area there.
community in America,
While we were
with their
there, and
very
she's from a
special
military
grievances
family.
against
While we were there,
the
there was
general American society at the time, to put aside those grievances
a
and to
funeral
fight
for
for
a
liberty
colonel,
and
an Air Force
democracy
colonel.
in the
And
world
they
and
had
also
everything,
here at
the
home.
horses, the caissons, the
Wow.
So prior
guns.
to shipping
And
out,
then
the
we
regiment was
thought, okay,
created in
that's all
June
that stuff is
16th
happening on the
with the
ground. And
appointment
then
of Colonel William Bill
overhead,
Hayward. He was the
flew
head
3
of
jets.
a commission
Wow.
in New York
Wow.
State,
Like, oh my God,
and
I couldn't
was very
believe it. I
friendly with
was
the
just
governor
like,
at the
wow.
time.
Air
It was
Force jets,
recognized in
fighter jets.
1917 as a national
was
guard
pretty-
Arlington
regiment
is
by the
such an
federal
amazing,
government,
amazing location.
and was
It
at that
is
time
incredible.
at
It is
1,215 officers
Yeah.
and men.
Yeah, very, very
They only had
moving.
2 weeks of rifle practice at
I
Peekskill
was
in May,
one of my major
and
things.
in
I mentioned
July they
Audie
were
Murphy the
recruited
other
up to
night.
war
Yeah,
strength
right,
of
right.
over
I went to
2,000
see,
men
that was our
and
first
56
thing
officers,
on my
and they were
agenda
mustered
was
in.
I want to
Good.
go to Murphy's
The image
grave.
at the right on the
Yeah.
top is Bill
And
Hayward.
then, of course, we
He
went to
was
the
the father
Kennedy.
of Leland
I was
Hayward,
gonna
the
say,
very
I
famous
was
Hollywood producer.
very young when I went there,
And
the first place
his
we went to
granddaughter is
was
Brooke
the Kennedy
Hayward,
Eternal Light.
who wrote
Yes.
the book
Yeah.
Haywire about
Also
their
very moving, and
dysfunctional family.
the
But that's
granite
another story for another
stones that
day.
are sort of
And
arrayed
at the
around
bottom
the whole
are a
area
number
there
of
with
the
his
musicians
Yeah.
of the regiment. These young
pieces of
men
his
came from
speeches
the
and things
Hampton
like that.
Institute
It was very,
down
very
in
moving.
southeastern Virginia.
We have.
Now, this is
what
very interesting.
I came up with a phrase.
Selected
what was
African
it?
American populations in the North Country.
Not religious. It's the opposite
The
of
first
religious.
column down are the total
when we
amount
just talk
of
about,
African Americans.
Um,
The second column are
crap.
those identified
Anyway,
particularly as
it's
black.
it's
of course,
it's a
in-
relic,
at
not
that
a holy
time,
relic,
Negro
but
was
it's
the
a
word used.
civic relic,
And
for
the
lack of
third
a better
column are
word.
biracial folks, whether
You know,
that's either
It's
white and black,
it's an icon
or black and
Yes.
American Indian,
of our
but
biracial
American
folks,
culture,
or any
within
culture
that
for that
total
matter. But
African American paradigm.
Well,
So
you know,
Albany
I
had the
mean,
largest.
it's
These are
special
counties, by the
for
way.
so many
Albany had
reasons. I mean, it has
1162.
heavy Civil War
With the
connotations.
black
Oh, good Lord, yeah.
population
Yeah,
far
and
exceeding the
with
biracial
Lee,
population,
built
and that holds true
mansion
for all
there,
of the other
and
counties except Delaware County.
I mean, it just, and then to
Delaware
look at all
County
of those
had
stones,
only
just
96
one after another
individuals
over those
identified as
hillsides, up
black,
and down, up and
and
down, up and down.
130
It's
individuals
amazing.
identified
It really
as
is amazing.
biracial.
Yeah,
That is
Oh, by the
anomaly.
way,
And
just
to
a
double
heads
check
up,
that the census records were
in
not
the body of
transposed
this
in the published books.
presentation,
I went
I
back
did
and
not
did a
include
search,
the specific
indeed,
story of Sergeant Henry
there
Johnson.
were about
Okay.
90 some odd
However,
people identified as
at
black,
the very, very tail
and
end,
the 130 as biracial.
I
So
did include
that has a lot to do
a page
with
about him
families
if
like the
there's
Mondor
time,
family,
or if
that,
people want to
Adrian
know
mentioned
about him.
before.
okay.
So you can
So
see that even up here, the black
that's another
population,
story.
except for Albany County,
I call it the
was
man,
relatively
the myth.
small.
No,
The man, the legend, the myth. Because so much of what
Now,
he did, the regiment
and after
was
the war has
formed
been
in June of
mythologized.
1916,
Ah.
and when America declared
it's like,
war,
did
it really
Washington
ramped
really
up its
cross the
wartime
Delaware
recruiting.
standing up in a boat?
At the left,
No.
these are from the Albany
did he
Argus
chop
down
paper,
at
by the
Cherry
way?
Street.
No.
April 1917.
So a lot of things
the Albany
ascribed
colored to Sergeant
the Albany
Johnson
County Colored
have
Republican
been
Club
is enlisting in the
greatly
15th Regiment
embellished.
National Guard,
Mhm.
not to
No.
fight, under Lieutenant
No.
Colonel Laurel Lord
Very
Spencer,
heroic,
the military
Yep.
deserving of the
secretary
Medal
to
of
Governor
Honor.
Whitman. But
on
all
the top
the
right,
a company of
all the
more than 100
stories
men from the
that
15th
spread
are doing
after
guard
the war
duty at
in
Bear
the
Mountain.
last
20, 30, 40 years.
And at the
are
bottom
just
right
that.
is
There's
July
stories not
1917,
grounded in
historical
25
reality.
members of the 15th
Mhm.
Regiment,
Mm.
the only Negro unit in state
Interesting.
service,
Yeah,
left the
yeah.
city.
I live in
and that was
Troy.
in
I mean,
July.
I have
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
a place
Albany
in Prattsville, but I
gave
also live in
many
Troy.
men to the regiment. And
And
fact, Company C,
so I'm
which was
very familiar
organized
with
by
Henry
Colonel
Johnson
Spencer,
Boulevard in Albany.
was known
Yeah,
as the
right.
Albany.
Did I tell you my
Company
my
within
mom's
the
family lived in
regiment.
North Greenbush off of
Oh,
Winter Street Extension?
Oh,
Now,
yeah,
this is
I
a
go
list.
that
I'm
way
not
all
going to
the
go
time
through
when
each
I'm
and every
Yeah,
single
yeah.
man, but
going
I'll
back
leave this
and
up for
forth.
just
Huh.
a
right
Interesting.
few
after
moments.
World War II, they bought
The first
they
two
bought an
columns
old
are men
farmhouse
from
on
Albany.
maybe, I don't know, 50 acres of
Going down
land.
the first column,
They
we
didn't
see
farm
George
it,
Morgan,
but they
he
had
was
so many
born in
people
Copelesville.
and kids and grandkids.
Robert
that they bought a
Watkins
big old
was a
farmhouse.
Southern transplant,
And
but he was living
actually
at
that's
the
where my
time,
Uncle Jim lived for
originally
many
in Great
years, but he
Barrington,
first got
and then
married.
in Albany.
So
The men
Wow.
whose names are
I mean, I
in
grew up
bold and italic
long
were those
before
men who
that area
died
was ever
during
developed.
the war,
I can
including Walter
imagine.
Dixon.
Yes.
How long have you been in
And
Troy?
then on the second
Actually,
column,
quite a long
fourth
time.
down,
I
is Edward
I
Taylor,
came here
living in
in,
Albany, but
I'm
born
trying
in
to think,
Hartford, Washington
1982.
County, which is where my family,
I
my
grew
paternal
up in
family, lived
Woodstock,
for
New York.
generations.
Oh, I know.
And they still live in
Yes,
that area to
right.
this day.
And then I,
arrived there after
then
the
I went
American
out and about
Revolution.
and started earning my living.
George
And
Russell Walker was born in
worked at
Catskill.
Mount Holyoke College
The third column,
in South Hadley,
including Captain
Massachusetts. And then I
Ranulph Compton,
came
a
back
white man.
home sort of to New York
These
State and
men
worked at
all
Emma
lived
School.
in Saratoga
And then
Springs.
at RPI, I
So you can see that
retired from
Saratoga Springs
RPI.
had quite a number of
Back
men
in,
this
about
regiment.
80
And again, they were also
4 or
in
85.
Company C.
I had a 1-year grant position.
Now,
with
these
the
are men
Rensselaer
from other
County
communities.
Planning
We have
Department.
William Vedder,
yeah.
Carl Vroman,
And
Harrison
I
Vroman.
was there.
They were from Schoharie.
Historic
The Wood
preservation
Baker was from
Oh, for
Rensselaer.
goodness sakes.
I prepared a
Wood Baker
report
a
on
little bit later.
historic preservation in
Pleasant
Rensselaer
Ralph from
County.
Troy, William Hellikas
And
from Catskill.
I was living with
His
my
great
aunt
grandfather was in the Civil
in
War.
Hudson
Harrison
Falls, New
Vroman's
York.
grandfather was in the Civil War.
And would come down
cetera.
whatever road
Yeah.
connects
Washington
So
County.
you had
passing
48 men in
Yes.
Washington County
Officer
Fairgrounds,
from the
three
North
Scotticoke
Country.
in this
Yes.
regiment.
Right.
Are you familiar with the Scotticoke Indians at
Now,
all?
Yes,
talk
I've
about
been
the
up to that
Vromans and William
that
Vedder.
mansion there,
Good. On the
the
left,
name of it.
there's
And
an
I actually
AI
hiked,
image
they
of
led, one
a
day they
married
had an
couple.
open house and they
The
led a
man on the
hike
left
along the
is
creek.
Cornelius T.
pointed-
Wonderful. The woman
Okay.
on the right
Yeah.
is Maria,
Yeah.
a Schoharie
It's
Indian
amazing.
woman.
It's really
Yeah.
amazing.
Cornelius
It
T.
is.
Bout served in
Yeah,
the militia
Ma-
during
many of the
American
refugees of
Revolution
King
and was
Philip's
part of the
War
sugar
ended
bush
up
raid
at the Scotticoke
that occurred here in Delaware
okay.
County.
with that band.
He married
Very
Maria.
interesting.
Again,
they
a
got
woman
out of New
the
England
Schoharie
when the
tribe,
getting was
which was
good.
an
Yeah.
amalgamation of, and then Mohawk.
A couple of
and
generations
Lenape
later,
and
along comes
Mohican.
the French and Indian War.
They had
They
several
go, "Oh,
villages
you guys
up
gotta
and down the
leave."
Schoharie
Yeah.
River,
Right.
and
Oh,
they
boy.
married. They were
Well,
part of the
let's
Dutch
see,
Reformed Church in Schoharie,
Jessica, I see we have
which records are
one
still extant.
woman.
And they
Should
had
we start
descendants in
letting
both the
people
Civil War
in or?
and in World War One.
That's
Two
up to
pictured
you. I
here
mean, it starts
include
at,
Private Harrison
you can
Vroman
if you'd like to.
and William
It's
Vedder.
now, well, it's
And there's a
not
little
quite
newspaper article
6:50,
from a
so
Schoharie newspaper that
I
talks
guess
about
it's-
William Vedder's being wounded
We can let
and
them
that he
in
has returned
now if you
home.
want. I mean, it's
And when they
it's
say
gonna be
at the bottom,
just so you
he was
know, I mean, there's
awarded the
people gonna
Distinguished
be
Service
here,
Cross,
so it's fine
that
as long
really
as you're okay
references
with it.
what
I think we probably
called the Croix
stop
de
our own
Guerre,
chit-chatting.
the
And
French Cross
even though
of
it's
War.
very, very interesting,
It's the
I'm enjoying
equivalent
it
of our
very much, and
Bronze
I'm
Star
learning,
in the American
there's
Army.
a lot of interesting
So
stuff.
these
that
are
we
two
can do together.
descendants of
with-
I mean, I
Cornelius
don't
Thibaut
think that anyone's gonna be
and
expected
Maria.
to be let in prior to 7.
Okay.
So yeah.
Then
Again,
we can just hang
after
out.
the war,
All right, yeah, let
men
them
came
hang out.
home. They created
Yeah.
a new post.
Speaking of
They were
Native
originally
American
part of
history
of
locally,
another Albany
Yes.
post.
are you familiar with the
But when
Moravian
they got enough
mission
members,
at,
they were
able to create their
there was
own
one in
post.
Kent, Connecticut,
And it was
but there was
named
one
Warlord Spencer
not too
Post,
far from
and
Kindle. And this is from
the name will come to be
mid
eventually. It's over along Route
1919,
22.
just
Is that the
months
road that
after the war
runs
ended.
along the New York
Is
border?
that the one in Taconic or
The
Taconic
Albany
or whatever?
Argus
however
newspaper
we
Well,
say
had
it?
this was
many
actually a
articles
Moravian mission.
about local
A
men
Moravian.
of this
mission.
Moravian
regiment
Indian
company
mission.
that
Are
served
you
in
familiar with
World War I.
the Moravian Indian work?
No, no.
When the regiment
So
returned
that was
back
a
to Long
German
Island before being
pacifist,
discharged, and after their
Presbyterian
famous
sect.
parade up Fifth Avenue,
They
on Lincoln's
came
birthday,
to
1919.
America.
North
These are
Carolina,
men,
and
these are sergeants,
rather, of the
eventually
redoubtable
Allentown,
Company C,
Pennsylvania. I'm
sorry,
sorry,
69th.
Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
And
Right,
fortunately,
yes.
they're all
And
identified.
they
And this is
missionized
just a
native
sample
groups,
of the young
primarily
men
the
of
Lenape
our area
and the
that
other
served
Algonquin
in the
groups like the
regiment.
Mohican.
Now, of course, Company C
And,
had
of
men
course,
from
they got
other
kicked out of
states
New
and other
York during
parts
the
of New
French and
York,
Indian War.
but a good because there was fear that they
about
would be,
a
fighting
third
against
of the
company
settlers
were men from Albany.
They ended up on several mission villages.
Now, this
in
is the man who organized them at Saratoga
northeastern area of
Springs.
Pennsylvania.
Captain Ranulph
around
Compton.
Bethlehem.
He had
Mhm.
served in the
Then the
Second
French and
New
Indian
York
War.
National
I
Guard.
mean,
He was stationed
then
at the
the
Mexican
Pontiac
border.
Rebellion broke out.
and
they were suspect.
he was
because
put
they
on
were American
reserve
Indians.
lists after he
And
returned from
they
Mexico.
well, there's a
But
whole long story. I won't go into all the
in,
details.
uh,
Let me just say that they ended up in Western
1918,
Pennsylvania, Eastern
1917
Ohio,
in April,
and at the
he
end
was
of the
called
American
back to
Revolution,
active duty,
over
where
80
he
of them were
organized and
massacred by
trained the
local
Company C.
Pennsylvania militia.
He went with the regiment to
because
France
of other Indian
He served with
raids
the
in the
regiment
area.
in France
Yeah.
up until
It's
April, when he transferred
the
to
massacre,
a tank
the Gannada
unit,
massacre.
the tank
That,
corps,
was that
and he
any
was a
way
hero
connected to
at the
Fort
Battle
Necessity?
of St. Mihiel
No,
later in the
no,
war.
no.
This is a nice
That'd be
portrait
good.
of Captain, later
This was
Major
in
Ranulph Compton
either
of Saratoga
1782 or
Springs.
83.
He later became
Oh,
the
after
military
Fort
secretary
Necessity.
to the
Yeah,
then
and
governor
you know
of
the
New York
Indian
State.
raids were just going crazy along the frontier. And the
Now,
local
before the men
militia
shipped
said,
out,
you know what?
there were
All Indians are
deaths
suspect,
in the regiment, so let's kill them all.
and that's
This
what they did.
is the
Men,
record
women, and
of William
children.
Helicus. William Helicus was part of
Men,
the
women, and
extended
children.
Mondor family,
And their
of the
bones were
Prattsville,
gathered
Roxbury
afterwards
area.
and put into
And
a
this is a
mound.
little detail
And that
of the
mound
Prattsville
is
map,
still there at the
and it shows what
reconstructed
was called
Gannada
Mississippi
Houghton.
Place.
In Ohio, that
That was
was
his
like
his
Janeda Hut.
ancestral grandmother,
But,
Sophia,
It really means tents of
Helicus,
peace.
nicknamed
Mhm.
Sippy.
It was not
And
peaceful.
William was living
No,
in
not at
Catskill.
all. Wow.
No.
He was the
No.
great grandson of Sippy.
So,
But how did they end
Uh,
up near
He was the
Kinderhook?
grandson of
well,
Alexander
they began,
Helicus,
well,
Civil
so
War veteran,
the Mohican,
and
the Mohican
a
related people
grandnephew
from that area
of
were,
another Helicus who was
drawn
at
to the
Galveston,
Moravians
Texas,
because of their
on
pacifist
June
message.
19,
Okay, yes.
1865.
And then they got
which,
driven
of
out of New
course,
York.
has
And
given
they ended
us
up in eastern
Juneteenth.
Pennsylvania near Allentown.
Mhm.
So
Then they got driven out
military
to western
traditions
Pennsylvania.
run
So
long.
those were the
in that
assimilated.
Native
Now, the
people.
thing about William
Okay.
was
The traditionalists
people
still live their
assumed
tribal
he died
lives.
in training
Yes,
camp,
right, right.
which is not
and
the
of course
case.
there was interplay.
If you look his records up
amongst-
on
between-
ancestry.com,
between
you'll
the
see
families.
that he died in
So
Willsboro, New
even
York,
the
on the 6th of
Christianized
September,
Indians
1917.
often
Willsboro
abandoned
is in that
the
little
mission life
dotted
and went back
area
to
on
live
the
the
map
tribal life.
on the left.
And,
And
during the War of
it's
1812,
above,
out in the
Ticonderoga,
Ohio
Port Henry,
area,
and before
the
you get to
traditional
Plattsburgh.
Lenape,
The company was
Shawnee
divided into
Indians,
platoons, and the platoons were
uh,
guarding
killed
railroad bridges,
the Christian
which were
Indians
deemed to
because
be
they thought they
key
had brought witchcraft
points
to the
of
tribe.
potential sabotage.
So
of
it's
the
really
enemy.
was brutal. It was brutal.
This is a picture
I
of
mean, it
World
was
War
Indian
II,
on
folks,
Indian. It was brutal.
including
Oh,
William's
yeah, right. That's what I'm realizing. There was
cousin,
a lot of Indian on
Charles
Indian
Helicus.
Oh, my Lord, yes,
Cousin of
yes.
the following
action going
generation,
on.
of course. Charles
Yeah.
Helicus.
I
Well,
know.
even
And
to
that's
this
Charles
day,
Helicus
you have the people
seated
who
at the bottom
assimilate,
in the middle.
and then you have the
And he
traditionalists.
lived in
Mhm.
Hunter.
And of course, now
And when
most
I gave a
people
Mondo
are
program a couple of years ago,
assimilated,
people
thoroughly.
who knew him,
Mhm.
but you still have
Express
some the fact that
traditionalists here and there.
they had known him,
Hmm.
and I were very proud to have known him
Wow.
and his family.
Gosh. Well, let's see. We have
So, of course,
6:54. So
New
maybe
York,
should we
no, the
start
U.S.
letting
Army, rather,
people
in its
in?
wisdom,
I
decided
just
to send
sent
the
out
regiment down
another
with the
email to
27th
everyone
Division
that
of New York
registered
State,
saying that we will begin
which
the
consisted
program
of other New
shortly,
York State
just in case
National Guard
sometimes
regiments,
people
and they sent them down
forget
into
that
the
they
hotbed of
are
Jim Crowism
registered.
and
Oh,
secession of a
okay.
generation
Machine's in.
earlier
So hello.
down at
Hello.
Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Hello.
Who's that?
Unlike
Are they all
most
muted?
histories that
Are they
talk
all
about this
muted?
time,
Everyone is
the
muted.
town
We do
generally
kindly
welcomed
ask that
them.
everyone stays
The
muted
mayor,
and
the
leaves their video
Chamber
off until
of
the
Commerce
question and
welcomed
answer
these
portion.
men. However,
Thank
Okay.
you.
there were
So
rednecks
they can
who
hear
did not welcome them,
me and you
and
and
there were
Rich.
several incidents
Correct.
All right, very
of
good.
racially
Okay.
motivated. On the
All
whole,
right, so
however,
there's a woman
they
named
were
Sherry
welcomed
Wack,
in
and
this
she can't
community
speak back
because
to
they
us,
were,
but we can
you
say
know,
welcome to her.
troops serving
Um,
the United States.
And we will begin
One
as
day,
soon as
Noble
people
Sissel
start
went
signing
into a
in, and they
local
are now
hotel to get a New York paper.
starting to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He was assured
Yeah.
by a local.
Well, I often
Black,
find when I give
community member,
programs,
no, it's
especially
okay, you can go
walking
in and buy a
tours,
paper.
and if they say it
Well,
starts
when
at,
Noble
say,
Sissel
1
walked
p.m.,
into the hotel,
people will show up at 1:15.
the hotel proprietor said,
Yeah, I
"Get the
know,
hell
it's
out,
very
you blankety blank."
interesting.
Kicked them in the rear
Because
end.
I'm the kind of guy who starts at like 5
and-
minutes to 1.
And a
you
New
know.
York
Yes.
officer, a white officer from another regiment, was reading
Oh,
in
speaking,
the
have
lobby.
you
He saw that. He
have
got
you ever
up
heard
and
of-
he accosted the
I'm
hotel
sorry,
owner.
have you ever heard of the Hall
Other
Mills
white
murder
New
case?
Yorkers came to the hotel and were threatening to
No.
tear it down.
Google it.
When
Okay.
Lieutenant
Mill.
James Reese
Paul
York, Jim
hyphen
York, came
Mills
in,
murder
called
case,
everybody to attention
1922,
and quelled
quelled the disturbance. I have a
But
book, and I've given
with the
about
fear
30
of
walking
Southern
tours
troops
and Northern Black troops
New Brunswick,
in
New
camping
Jersey,
together.
The
Oh, in
regiment
New
was
Jersey,
immediately
okay,
sent
mhm.
overseas. Episcopal minister and his lover were found murdered, and because of that, there were the first 100,000. Huge. It was like the first crime of the century, of the 20th century. And on the right, it was huge. Little remembrance of an English boy, and he talks about the Yanks and who are the Yanks, and he says, you know,
Oh,
the Yanks
I meant to
are
ask you,
everybody.
do you have
The English, the
yourself
French,
any
there's some of this,
relatives
there's some
that
of
are
that. There are
connected
blank
to
Yanks, there are white
the
Yanks,
Harlem Hell
but they're
Fighters?
all Yanks. No, and of course,
However,
our great song
and,
that everybody knew was,
please remind me, or
we won't come back until it's over say this. There. My mom's dad was in World War I, so very
Okay.
patriotic. He did not ship out from his training camp on Long Island. However,
Mhm.
he was on the Hudson River line
Mhm.
between Albany and New York City, and I was told not too long
These
ago
are just
by my
little
oldest
snippet
brother, who's in his 70s,
Mhm.
that our grandfather
Of action
was
in
friends
World War
with
I.
the Porters.
Wow,
The Porters being, of course, African-American gentlemen.
American, right, yeah.
And they were buddies. So I think that's interesting. A number of those men were in the Hell Fighters.
Oh, okay, all right,
So through my grandfather, the answer is yes.
yes, okay.
That's a convoluted way.
No. It's the fun part about history is you can start untangling all those connections.
Absolutely. Yeah. I got to turn the sound off.
Let's
These
see,
are
so
trenches in the area.
we're up to 11, well, 11
And-
including us, so maybe a few more people.
I'm trying to turn the sound off. I'm just going to grab something for show and tell. I'll be right back in
Go
10
right
seconds.
ahead. Right,
And
go right.
the blue lines are German
So we
trenches. The
have
red
about 2
lines
more
are
minutes
French
to go,
trenches.
and
This is 90 miles
as
east
soon
of
as
Paris.
everyone is signed in,
And you can
and
see
Rich is
how
back, we can
honeycombed
begin.
the whole area is. And I'm just going to have to take a moment and get this thing to turn off. And I was successful. So this is the area
artifact
from the battlefields
to the
and the
east.
trenches
This
where
is
these
the
men
area of
served.
France.
Champagne in French,
Oh.
Champagne in French.
And
And
again,
again,
has been good.
you can
I've
see
been able
how
to go there twice.
honeycombed this area is.
Most recently with my lovely
trenches.
granddaughter last
The
April.
forward trenches, the secondary trenches, the communication
So-
trenches, the rear
That's
line
very special.
trenches.
And
trenches
artifacts, by
everywhere.
the way, artifacts
This is a
of World War
wartime
I
map.
are lying around on the
This
ground.
is an area where
everywhere.
the 369th served.
Really, in Europe?
This is the area
Yeah.
called Massage.
I mean, at certain locations.
and there were French
obviously.
trenches all through this
Locations, right.
area.
Yeah.
The blue lines are the
Very
German
good.
trenches. And Ville-sur-Turbe is a little
Okay,
village
let's see,
there.
we have
I
another
have been blessed to be able to
minute to
visit there
go.
twice, most recently with my granddaughter in last April. These words are called in English, bois de hazy, in French, bois de zi. And this is the area where the Hell Fighters were
It
stationed
seems as
for
if
2 months.
we've reached that
in
number of
this
11.
area,
but, let's see, we'll just give
And
it
then
one more.
later, over
I've been
in this
pushing it on
area.
all my Facebook links, so
Yeah.
who knows?
Who knows?
Oh,
So this is
Very
a
good, very good,
1915 painting
excellent.
of the
Yeah,
Bois
let's
de
see, Bob
Zi.
Titus is,
The
and I
Ferme
assume
de
that's Johanna,
Montplaisir
too.
is the yellow area on
and I
the
know
left.
Bob Gildersleeve.
That,
These are people from, those
I
who
have
are
a funny
listening.
story, which I
from,
won't go into more in
the
details. The farm is no
Historical
longer there.
Society's Board of
And
Directors. I
I
noticed
stopped and
Paul
asked people
Slutsky's
where
name.
the farmhouse was, and they didn't know what the heck I was talking about because it no longer stands. But we did figure out where it stood. And Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts were stationed on a listening post over in this area. A little village called Melzicourt, which is now vanished because of disease after the
7
war.
p.m.
And the
So I
or
think we will
Ain
begin.
River
And
flows in this
Jessica,
area.
you're recording this?
But this is the Bois de Zi where the
Yes, I am.
369th was stationed.
Very good. And has the recording has already started?
This
Yes, it
is a
has.
photograph
Okay,
from
all right, very good.
1915.
Well,
This is
I'm
Ville-sur-Turbe right here.
very delighted to
Most of
welcome
the buildings
everyone
have been
this evening.
demolished. This
Thank you very
standing
much
building
for
is the
joining us
church.
tonight.
These are the French
This is our
trenches here
first program
with
of our
the
52nd
access
season.
trenches.
And so
And you can see
we're very
The
excited
blue
about
line
having
up
it
here are the
start
German
out
trenches that are
tonight
shown,
with
not the
this
French.
presentation.
The 369th was stationed
I
in this
don't,
area.
probably most people are
once
familiar
they,
with the
left the
Historical
Bois de Zi
Society.
area,
We're
which
located
was
at the
very
top of the
close by,
Catterskill
by the
Clove.
way.
Oh, I think I forgot to
They
introduce myself. I'm
routinely
Adrienne Laris, the
find
president
dead
of the
soldiers to
Historical
this
Society.
day in this
Um,
area.
And
thousands,
our mission
thousands
is to
died
discover,
in
preserve,
this
interpret,
particular
and
area
share
during the war.
the unique history of the Catskill Mountain region. We have a 50-acre campus. We are
This is a map
the
made by
home
an
of the
American officer,
1913 Ulster and
Lieutenant
Delaware train
Landon,
station
Harold
on the
Landon.
National and Historic
The area with the light
National and
coloring
State Historic
are the
Registries.
American
We have an
or the
archive that
Allied lines,
contains some
including the
7,000
Americans. There's Ville
artifacts.
Saturbe again.
We're the western
Here's
trailhead
Calvert.
of the Catskill Rail
These are
Trail.
the German lines.
And
And
it
every
leads
night,
past our train
there would be
station
raiding
all the way
parties
out
back and
to the
forth, back
viewing
and forth, back
platform
and
for the
forth,
Catskill
looking to
Falls.
capture prisoners.
A
And
full
there's,
list of our
Montplaisir.
programs for 2025 will be available on
And
our
this is
website
the
as soon as the
approximate
details
location
are
of where
set.
Johnson
and
and
we're working
Roberts
on that
were
now.
stationed at a forward
You
post.
can also
when they were
check
attacked
us
by
out
about
on
24
Facebook and
Germans
Instagram
in a
for
raiding
postings
party.
and
And
updates as well.
Johnson and Roberts, particularly
I'd like
Johnson,
to
were
extend
able
a special
to
thank you
beat them
to the
back,
Mountaintop Historical
kill
Society
4,
members who are
wounded several
participating
more,
this evening.
and the Germans
Our
retreated
members are
after
important
cursing out
partners
the
in the work
Americans
of the
in perfect
Mountaintop
English.
Historical Society. I'd also like to thank the Bank of Greene County for their support of our programming and Stewart Shops for supporting
just
digital
trying to
access
advance
to
the
this
photo.
program. Tonight, in honor of Black History Month, we are
And
pleased to
It's not
present
advancing for
the
some
Harlem
silly
Hell
reason.
Fighters from the North Country, a talk by Richard Sears Walling.
I'm gonna have to go
The Harlem Hell
to
Fighters were an
we go.
African-American
Okay.
infantry regiment
technology.
in the New
Love it.
York Army
So after the
National
war,
Guard during World War
Sergeant
I
John
and
Jamieson of
World War
Saratoga
II.
Springs, along with
The
other
story of
comrades,
the
wrote a
local
book
men of the
right after
Harlem
they
Hell
got home in
Fighters, the
early
most famous
1919.
regiment of the
Complete history of the
American
colored soldier.
Army during World
There
War
is
I, will
Sergeant John
be shared
Jameson,
tonight.
up
In
on a
addition to better
lamppost in
known heroes
Paris,
such as Sergeant
with
Henry
whom he
Johnson
identifies as
of
the daughter
Albany,
of the
there were
president
men
of
from
France.
our
I don't know if
area,
that's
including
accurate,
Sergeants Carl and
but
Harrison
John
Vroman of
Jamieson
Schoharie
was a
and
very
James
vociferous
Jamieson
raider
of Saratoga
of the
Springs.
activities
The
of this
regiment went
regiment. He
overseas
went
in
on speaking tours,
1917 with an
and he had
original
a very
complement
long,
of
successful career
2,200
in
men
sports medicine,
and
Veterans
76
Affairs, and as a
officers, and
civil rights
returned
leader
in
as he went through
1919 with
life.
1,200 men and
So
35
this is a map of the
officers
area,
of that group.
and
Their
I do this particularly
heroism
for
in France
the next
earned
slide. This
them
is
the immortal
Massige.
nickname, the
Ville
Harlem
Saturbe
Hell
is over here to the
Fighters.
right.
I'd like
And
to now
over
introduce
in this area,
Mr. Walling.
let's
You
see,
may be
yep, right over in
familiar
this
with him
area,
and his background. Last year, he presented
Jameson was
a
with a
fascinating
soldier
talk on the Mondor family of
whose story
Prattsville.
we'll read in
He
just a
grew up in
moment.
New Jersey and presently makes his home in Stamford, New York. He is the
So,
son of 2 World War II
This is a
officers
story,
and a graduate
part
of
of that book I
Rutgers
just showed
University.
you,
He has dedicated his life to
about
history,
the death
historic
of Private
preservation,
James
and
Turpin.
humanitarian
And I'm
causes.
just going to read part of
His
the
primary
right-hand
work
paragraph.
is in African American
It was
and
while doing
Native
this sort of
American
duty that I
history
saw
and
my first comrade
genealogy.
killed, James Turpin.
He's
We
the
had just
author
taken
of
our
numerous
places for
books,
duty in an
including
observation
My
post.
Year in
I had
France,
warned Turpin
about a
about
Harlem
putting his
Hell
head out the
Fighter,
door.
and
I was
Edward and
standing
Eleanor
inside
and the
looking through
Wages
my
of Sin,
glasses,
about
watching
the
the Germans who
infamous
were mending their barbed
1922
wire,
double
when the Germans suddenly
homicide
began to
of a
shell our
minister and
sector
his
very
lover
heavily.
in New
We
Brunswick, New
could not
Jersey.
locate the angle from
He
which
is
they
the
were fighting
recipient of honors
because they
from
were
the
using
Oliver
gas,
Cromwell
and
Black
we were
History
forced to put on
Society
our gas
and the
masks.
Sons of the
At that
American
moment,
Revolution.
there was no way to
Mr.
get the
Walling, if you
information
are
back to the
ready,
intelligence department,
please
where
begin.
such information was
Thank you very
always
much,
wanted.
Adrian. First
So
of all,
we
I'd
were
like to
forced
thank
to
the
remain
Historical
there.
Society for
I had
inviting me
just
to give
told
this
Turpin
program.
that he would lose our dinner because we could not
I
go
spent
out on
a
account
long
of the heavy
time
bombardment.
gathering the
Turpin
various
replied,
facts from
"All
various
right, buddy,
locations.
I will stay."
I'd like to thank Jessica
The shelling kept
for helping
kept
to
up 2 or 3
coordinate
more
all of the
hours more.
technical work
And just
and
when we
the
thought they were
other
through,
administrative
Turpin said that
details
he
that go
wanted some
into
water.
these
He
types of
started
programs.
at the door, but I called him
So
back. He
let's
turned
begin
around
at
to
the
me and said,
beginning.
"Are you afraid, Jimmy?"
Just
Those are
by
only
way
little
of
ones, referring to
personal
the shells.
background, my
And
grandfather,
none of them
my
have
mom's
my
dad,
name marked on them.
was
These are the
in
last
the
words he
U.S.
uttered.
Army during World
Handing
War
me
I,
my
but he
glasses,
did not
he
ship
stepped
out
outside,
overseas.
and the next moment I
However,
felt something warm
being a
splashing
resident
over my
in
body.
the Albany area,
There was my
he
comrade,
worked on the Hudson River
lying a
line
short distance from
in
my
the
feet.
1930s,
His head had been
40s,
shot
50s,
from his
60s.
body and lay to one
And
side.
as a
The
conductor,
poor boy's
he
blood was
knew
splattered all
and
over
was
my body.
friends with the porters who worked at
That
the station in Albany.
is a
And
photograph
of course, many of the
of the
porters
body
were actually veterans, not
James
only
Turpin.
of World War I, but also of this particular
to the
regiment.
right.
So through
his
my
dog tag. familiar connection
Each
with my
company
grandfather.
had a
I
medical
do have
officer
that relationship
assigned
to
the
the story
First
of men of the
Battalion
North
was
Country
Dr. William
in the Harlem
Keenan, a
Hell
Quaker.
Fighters. It was
So
the
this
doctor's
is an image of
duty
a late
to
war
collect the
battle
dog
scene
tags
with
of dead
German
soldiers.
soldiers in their
This dog
stormtrooper
tag
tactics,
ended up in a box
advancing
of
through
World
shot
War
and
I
shell.
knickknacks at
And
a
the
flea
painting can only
market.
give just as the
Somebody
slightest
posted
hint
it
of what
online,
war was really
and
like
of
on the
course,
Western
through
Front.
research, I came across it.
On the left are
And
French
that dog
soldiers
tag
with the
was on the
traditional
body
Adrian
of
helmet,
James Turpin,
firing
whom you
their
see to the west.
version of the automatic rifle called a show. You can see the
Now this
semicircular clip
is
there.
going to be
On the upper right
just some
are French
images
soldiers in their horizon
of
blue uniform,
the
a man in a brown
369th from
uniform,
French archives,
which represents their
these are
colonial troops
actually
from North
men
Africa,
of the
which consisted
316th,
of
while
both
on July
native
22nd,
born,
1918,
Arabic,
you can see the
Moroccan,
men and their officers
and
are
also
all around.
colonial settlers
They're
of North
sharing
Africa.
the same
And then on the
water
bottom right
source
are battlefield
for
dead
bathing
with
or washing
crosses
up.
of burials right on the battlefield.
These are men in the secondary
So it was
trenches.
hell on earth during World
They're
War
not on the
I.
frontline trenches. This was just
So
after a
North
major
Country
German
Hell
assault
Fighters,
on July 15th.
and there
by the
is
way.
our area with Schoharie and Albany
And-
and Saratoga Springs circled.
Let's see if I can advance it.
And
Yeah,
by way
here's a
of
patrol
background,
coming back.
the 15th New York National Guard
Now, what's
Regiment
interesting is some of the men are
was,
wearing American gear, and some of them
advocated
are wearing
for
their
many
French
years
gear,
prior to its
which
formation.
means the men with the American
The
gear
growing black
are
community
replacement
in
troops.
New York City, particularly in Harlem.
And there's a soldier
called
loading ammo
for,
into a clip
unit
of a
the leading
show
men of that
automatic
community
rifle.
called for a unit, including Charles Fillmore, who became a captain in
Now,
this
they were on
unit,
these trenches
and then also transferred to the
from
370th
April
Regiment
until
later in the war.
September
The
1918.
New York legislation languished because
The news,
there was
the
not
Meuse
a big
offensive
interest
kicked
in,
off on
other
September
than
26th.
New York City for such
You
a
may have
regiment.
heard of the Lost Battalion. You may have heard
in,
of Sergeant Alvin York.
The early
That was
part
about
of the
5 miles
1910s,
to the east of where these men
1915,
were serving.
1916. Of course,
This
we
is
had
a
the rage
painting
by
by Horace
Poncho Villa
Pippin
along the
of
Mexican
Goshen, New
U.S.
York, a
border.
native New Yorker.
Nothing is ever new under the
He
sun.
made many
apparently.
paintings and sketches
And
of his time
many
in
of
war.
the New York
And this is
regiments
the
went
assault
down to the border,
on,
and it was
Bellevue
realized that,
Signal
oh gosh,
Ridge.
you don't have any,
This is a
any other
close-up, slightly
National
lightened
Guard
up.
regiments in
Here
case
the
of
Americans have
statewide
their
emergencies.
Brody helmets.
And so the creation of
They
the
have their
15th
French
was
lapel
fast-tracked at that
cross
point
straps.
by 1916.
They have blanket rolls instead of knapsacks.
I'll only just mention
like
the first
Civil War
part. They
or
were changing
Spanish-American War
demographics.
days.
New
And
York
they're
State
doing hand-to-hand
in
combat with the Germans.
1890, there were 6.9 million whites and only 70,000 African Americans.
This is
In
a wartime map.
1900, there were 9 million whites
annotated with the
and
movements of the troops.
134,000
And the
African
troops were coming
Americans,
from
almost double in 10
to
years.
the bottom of the map.
And of course, that was part of the
up
Great
to
Migration.
Bellevue Signal
And then
Ridge,
the
which
other
is this ridge
details
right
here
here.
are just particularly about
The
Manhattan.
369th
And
was the
I will
Kepsis
send
show.
this program as
The
a
372nd,
PDF to
another fellow
Jessica.
black regiment.
So if anybody's listening this evening,
another
or
black
other members
regiment,
of the society
were
would
part
like
of
a
this
copy
assault.
of it, they can
And the
contact Jessica
369th did
a few
finally,
days
after
after
5
this
days of
presentation
combat,
for a
of
copy of
advancing
these
forward
slides.
about 6 miles, they finally captured Seychelles.
One of the leading men,
And
of
this is
the
how
regiment
it looks to this day.
was James Reese Europe.
There's
He was
the
the
North
Jay-Z
East
of
Ridge
his generation.
of the
He was the
Bellevue
leading
Signal Ridge.
entrepreneurial
There's the
musician
show.
of his
And at this
generation
corner
in the African American
Is the
community.
monument to
And
the
what he said
369th
basically was,
Infantry.
we are strangers in New York.
I was there in
Joining the regiment will
on,
be the means of
Armistice Day,
forming comradeship
November
with
11,
some fine young men of the city.
2022.
New York
And,
is a
every
peculiar
year
city.
the village puts
People are
on
clannish,
a
and you have a very small
ceremony
chance to meet
honoring
any of the fine
369th
businessmen
at that
in the
monument
city
every
of our
single
race.
year since
Skipping
World War
down, he says towards the end, about 5 lines up, the
Now,
unit is being promoted by the biggest men
C
on Wall
Company,
Street.
part of
We
the
will
first
eventually
battalion,
have a big armory
had been in
where the
reserve
young men
during
can
the
have healthful
advance.
exercise, swimming
And
pools,
on the
athletic
afternoon
training,
of July
which will
29th,
build
they
up the
pushed
manhood
off
of
Bellevue
Harlem
Signal Ridge
to
across
accomplish
that
these
open plan.
results.
The
And
best
attack
and most sincere,
energetic
each
men
building in
the community
Seychelles
must get in
harbored
the
machine
move.
gun nests.
And
at
he ought
the
to know
windows
because
within the
he
building.
was called the Jazz King.
And this excerpt is from Major
When
Arthur
America
Little,
went to war,
who wrote a book
particularly after
called
the
From
sinking
Harlem
of
to the Rhine.
Lusitania in 1915,
And I highlighted the Company C.
the declared
Company C
war
had gone
against Germany
into
in
and was
April
working its way through the
1917.
middle section of the town.
Black Americans rallied to
Company
the flag
D
as they had done
was
in all
advancing
previous
through the right
wars,
border streets.
particularly the Civil War
Both of these
and
companies
the
were
Spanish-American
meeting
War.
and
of course, there's
resistance.
an image on the left
Company
of a black
B
soldier
was entrenched
bearing
near the
American
southern
flag
edge.
and the left of the town.
The
there was no fighting being offered
leader
at their front.
and editor of
Bates,
the
a captain,
NAACP
reported to me
that he was holding his
basically
company
said in
intact
his famous crisis
so as to
speech
be available
that this is
for
the
a crisis
special
of the world,
reinforcement if one should
and
be needed.
he, in this
The support
editorial,
elements were
he
entrenched
urges
with me in
the
a
black
roadside
community
ditch,
in America
apparently,
with
the
their
southern
very special
edge
grievances
of the town
against
the
and
general
again,
American
the
society at the
regiment,
time to put aside those
the first
grievances
battalion,
and to fight
pushes off
for
of this
liberty
ridge
and
on the
democracy
afternoon about 3 in the
in the
afternoon
world
on September
and also
29th
here at home.
after heavy resistance. And by the way,
So prior to shipping out,
I was up
the
on that
regiment was
ridge,
created in June of
and
16.
in this wood
With the
line,
appointment of Colonel William
there
Bell
are still
Hayward,
German trenches.
he was the
barbed wire,
head of
and
a commission
over
in New York, in
and
New
this
York
road
State,
below it
and was very
still
friendly
to
with
this
the
day
governor
is a
at the
German
time.
pillbox.
It was recognized in
from the war
1917 as a National Guard
and to
regiment
show
by the federal government.
This
And
C company
was
went
at that
into
time
the middle
at
part
1,216
of the
officers and
village.
men. They only had 2 weeks of rifle practice at Peekskill in May, and in July they were
And this is
recruited
just an
up to war
AI
strength
illustration
of over
of
2,000
what
men
it may have
and
looked
56
like.
officers, and they were mustered in. The image at the right on the top is Bill Hayward. He was
So,
the father of Leland
every
Hayward,
month,
the very famous Hollywood
Each
producer.
company
Had a
and
roster. His
taken.
granddaughter is Brooke Hayward,
And this is the
who,
roster for
wrote
September.
the book Haywire
1918
about their
for
company
dysfunctional
family. But
It's
that's
about
another story for
5 or
another
6
day.
pages in length.
And at the bottom
the
are a
front
number
cover
of
and
the
one
musicians
page.
of the regiment.
But
These
you
young
can
men
see
came from the Hampton
on the
Institute
listing of the men,
down in southeastern Virginia.
all the men
And the right-hand column
Now, this is
that
very
are listed as
interesting.
wounded. Selected African American
Now, what's
populations
interesting
in the
and a
North
little
Country.
frustrating, they did not mark
who was
the
killed.
first column down
on
on
these
these total
rosters.
amount
You have
of
to go to
African
other
Americans
records
for that.
The second column
So,
are those identified particularly as black. Of course,
the
in
September
at that time, Negro was
19,
the word used.
And
18
the
third
roster for
column
C
are
company,
biracial folks.
they
Whether
had
that's
3
either
officers and
white and
190
black
men they went into battle
or
with.
black and American Indian.
Of that number,
but biracial
62
folks
were wounded.
within that total.
From other
African-American,
records, we know that
paradigm.
11 were killed.
So Albany had
or
the largest.
mortally
These are
wounded.
counties, by the way.
That's
Albany had
39%
1,162 casualties.
Almost
with
4
the
out
black
of 10 men
population
was a
far
casualty.
exceeding the biracial
The
population.
regiment
and that
overall, the
holds
regiment
true
lost
for all of the
about
other
800
counties
men,
except
taking Delaware
in this
County.
drive. It was part of the
Delaware
County.
The Meuse
Had only
offensive
96
of September
individuals
1918.
identified as black and 130 individuals identified as biracial. That is an anomaly. And to double check that the
Now, one of
census
the men
records were not
from our
transposed in
area
the published books
was Roy
I went back
Baker,
and did a search, and he
indeed,
enlisted at
there
Peekskill
were
about 90 some odd people
uh,
identified as black.
Yep, he enlisted at
and
Peekskill
130 as
on
biracial.
May
So
15th.
that has a
That's
lot
the
to
same
do
day
with
that
family
several
the Mondor
men
family
from
that
C
Adrian
Company
mentioned
from
before
Albany
enlisted.
So you can
in
see that even
the
up
regiment.
here,
The black
they
population,
all took the train down.
except for Albany County,
They went to
was
the camp
relatively small,
and they signed up.
there at the camp. There was one man,
Now,
Carl
the regiment
Vroman,
was formed in
I'll
June
mention
of
him now.
1916.
Carl Vroman
and when America
lied
declared
about his
war,
age.
it really ramped up.
He was
its
born in
wartime recruiting.
1901 at the left.
And he
These are from the
enlisted
Albany Argus
in
newspaper, by the way.
1917,
April
at the age of
1917.
16.
The Albany colored,
He had
the Albany
backdated
County
his
Colored
birth by 2
Republican
years.
Club is
So he
enlisting
told
in the
them he was
15th
18.
Regiment National Guard.
He died in
under
1974.
Lieutenant Colonel Laurelard Spencer,
So
the
Carl
military
Vroman
secretary to
was
Governor
16.
Whitman.
Needham
on the top
Roberts,
right, who was
a
in the
company of
dugout
more than
with
100 men
Henry
from the
Johnson,
15th,
are
he
doing guard
was
duty
only
at Fair
a
Mount.
he was 15
when
and
he
at
joined
the bottom
them.
right is July
So
1917.
a lot of underage men
25 members of the
served,
50th Regiment,
not only in just
the
in this
only Negro
regiment,
unit in
but
state service,
in
left
the
the
Army
city in general.
and that was in July.
As long as you had
So
great
Albany
and
gave
gave
pass for
many
18,
men to the regiment,
you were mustered
and
in.
in fact, Company C, which
So,
was organized by Colonel
unfortunately,
Spencer,
was
or,
known as
Roy
the
Baker,
Albany Company
he
within
died
the regiment.
in June.
Of accidental wounds. There's no other
Yeah,
record.
this is a list. I'm
about
not going to go through
whether
each and every
it
single
was
man,
another
but I'll leave
soldier
this
shot
up for
him by
just
accident,
a few
or
moments.
he was cleaning his weapon.
The first
he
2
was shot.
columns are men
It's kind
from
of hard
Albany.
to clean a rifle and shoot yourself.
Going
So
down
I'm
the first
assuming,
column, we see George
or
Morgan,
presuming
He was
that
born in
another soldier
Cobleskill.
accidentally shot him.
Robert Watkins was a southern
And
transplant.
He was
But
from
he was living at
Rensselaer,
the
New
time,
York, originally in Great Barrington, and then
he's
in
buried
Albany.
at the men whose names
Although
are in
bold and
cemetery
italic
were those men who
Mount
died
Montfaucon,
during the
Mount
war,
Falcon,
including Walter
over
Dixon.
just north of Verdun.
And then
huge
on the
American
second
cemetery.
column, fourth down,
Is
I forget
Edward
the exact
Taylor,
number, but there's probably
living in
20 or
Albany,
30 Hell
born
Fighters
in
buried in
Hartford,
Hartford,
Washington
Washington
County,
County, which is where my
many were
my
returned to
paternal
the States,
family
but
lived
most of
for
them
generations.
remained buried in France.
And they still live in that area to this day. They arrived there after the American Revolution. George Russell Walker was born in Catskill.
As the war is winding down,
The third column,
and
including Captain Ranulph
the
Compton,
Albany
a white
Argus,
man,
these
is proud
men all
of
lived
its
in
young men,
Saratoga Springs,
including
so
Henry
you can
Johnson.
see that Saratoga Springs had quite a
And,
number of men in this.
This is the
regiment.
banner
And
headline.
again, they were
from
also
November 15th.
The command, the
C.
Kaiser be taken grows.
New honor.
Now,
for
these are men
Albany.
from other communities.
uh,
We have William
Negroes.
Vedder, Carl Vroman, Harrison Vroman,
And
they were
at
from
the
Schoharie.
left,
Roy Baker
is
was
from
from
the same
Rensselaer.
page.
I have a little
Colored
bit on Roy
fighters
Baker
of
a
Henry
little bit later.
Johnson's unit
Is
Pleasant
reclaimed
Ralph
in
and
Troy
Province
William
with
Pelicans
Pelicans
from
French Army
Catskill. His
on
great grandfather
Tuesday.
was in the
So
Civil
they're
War.
serving with the
Harrison
French
Vroman's
Army,
grandfather was in the Civil War
in
Alsace-Lorraine.
as the
So
war
you had
comes
48
to an
men
end.
and one officer from
What had happened
the North
was
Country
when the
in this
regiment got to France,
regiment. It was an orphan regiment.
Now,
Let's
was
talk
not
about
part of
the
a division.
Vromans and William Vedder.
it was not part of a table
On
of
the left
organization
is an
within
AI
the U.S. Army,
image
which is
of
highly structured.
A married couple.
When
man
the
on the
racial
left is
incidents had
Cornelius
occurred
Thibaut.
in South
The woman on
Carolina,
the right is Maria,
and up in Jersey
Schoharie
with the
Indian
Alabama
woman.
troops, where the
Cornelius
Alabamians
Thibaut
swore that they
served in
would
the
fight
militia during the American
the
Revolution
black
and
soldiers,
was part of the Sugar Bush
um,
raid that occurred here in
the
Delaware
colonel,
County.
Colonel Hayward, went to the
He
War
married
Department and said,
Maria.
look, again,
If
a
you want
woman
blood here
of
in
the
America,
Schoharie tribe,
you can
which
have
was
that.
an
Or
amalgamation
you
of
can send my regiment to
Mohawk
France.
and
We'll do whatever it
Lenape
takes.
and
Just
Mohican.
get us to France.
They had several villages
So
up
the
and down
army
the Schoharie
took him
River.
at his word. By the way, he had been a
And
student under
they
General
married.
Pershing.
They were part of the Dutch Reformed
in an
Church in
ROTC
Schoharie
program out in the
which
Midwest. So he
records are
knew
still
Pershing
extant
personally.
and they had,
had a good
descendants
relationship
in both
with
the Civil
Pershing.
War and
So,
in World War One.
They get to
Two
France
pictured here
after
after
several
Harrison
attempts.
Vroman,
Bad
and
ship
William
Vedder.
had kept them from
And there's a little
landing
newspaper
earlier,
article
but they
from
finally
a
get to
Schoharie
France.
newspaper
The end of
that
December
talks about William Vedder's
1917.
being wounded.
What
and
people
that he
don't
has
know
returned
is
home.
within 5 days.
And when they say
they
at
were
the bottom,
officially
he was
loaned
awarded the
to the
Distinguished
French
Service
Army.
Cross, that really
However,
references what
they worked for 2
Croix de
months.
Guerre, the
as,
French Cross of War.
It's the
Pioneer
equivalent of our
engineer
Bronze
troops.
Star in the
That's
American
a polite
Army.
way of saying they were used
So
as
these
labor
are 2
troops to build
descendants
roads,
of
to build a
Cornelius
railroad,
Thibaut
to build a
and
dam,
Maria.
all in anticipation of the 4 million Americans
Again,
expected
after the war,
to follow them.
men came home.
In the coming
They
years.
created a new
Now,
post.
only 2 million
They were
Americans
originally part
were sent over
of another
by the time
Albany
the war
post,
ended.
but when they got enough
1919,
members,
it was
they were
expected another 2 million
able
Americans
to
would
create their
follow.
own posts.
So these men,
And
like many
it was
other
named
units,
Warlord
both white
Spencer
and black,
posts. And this
is
Asian
from,
conscripts,
Asian
contract laborers,
1919, just
French
months
civilians,
after the war
Belgian
ended.
civilians. They worked
And
as
the
Albany
Albany
Argus
to build the
newspaper had
roads,
many
to build the
articles
trenches, to build
about local men,
railroads,
of this
to
regiment,
do
and company
anything that an
served in
army
World
needs to
War
do,
I.
and that's what these men did. The men thought that they were
When
being
the
abused
regiment returned
by being
back to
labor
Long
troops,
Island before being
but Colonel Hayward knew
discharged,
that
and
they
after
would
their
soon be
famous
joining the
parade
French
on Fifth
Army.
Avenue on
What
Lincoln's
the men
birthday,
know and what the
1919,
officers know are
these
two
are men,
vastly
these are
different
sergeants
things.
rather, of the
Some
redoubtable
people
Company C,
complained that they were used as
369th.
stevedores. That is not true.
And
Fortunately,
they
they were all
complained
identified.
they were being used
And
as
this is
just regular
a
old
sample
labor troops,
of
not
the young
true.
men of our
There's
area.
a title for that
Those
served
kinds of men. They're
in the
called
regiment.
combat engineers.
Now, of course, Company
and that's
C
what they
had
were.
men from other
They were
states and
combat
other parts of New
engineers
York
doing
but
labor
a good
in building
the
about
infrastructure
a
necessary
third
for
of the
war.
company were men from Albany. The painting on the
Now,
bottom
this
right
is the man who organized
is
them
by
at
a well-known
Saratoga
artist
Springs.
whose name I
Forgot to write
Captain
down, but a
Ranulph
well-known
Compton,
American artist.
He had served in the
He went to
Second
France
New York
for
National
a couple
Guard.
of months. He painted
He
many
was
scenes
stationed
of
at the
American
Mexican
troops.
border, and here
And
he was put on reserve
he's a painting
list
rather
after he
of
returned
Colonel
from
Hayward
Mexico
in the right front
but
foreground.
in
His men passing by him.
1918, pardon me, sorry,
Hayward has
1917,
on his
April,
left shoulder
he was called
the
back
patch
to active
of a
duty,
rattlesnake on
where
a
he
black
organized and
background.
trained
That
the
was the
company
unit's
he went with the
designation, or
regiment
the
to
unit's
France.
insignia.
He served with the
But that
regiment
did not come
in
into
France
being
up until
well
April,
after the
when he
fighting ended.
transferred to
So,
a tank
unit.
The common soldier
The
did not
tank
wear that
corps,
patch until after
and
they
he
got
was
to
a
the
hero
United
at
States
the Battle
of Saint Mihiel later in the war.
As the men
But
go
this is
by,
a nice portrait of
you see
Captain
both
later
the
Major
American
Van
flag
Hoof Compton
and the New
of
York State
Saratoga
flag.
Springs.
This
He
is the
later
only
became
regiment
the
in the
military
entire
secretary to
American
the then
Army
governor of New York
that
State,
fought under a state flag, because they began.
Now, before
as
the men
15th
shipped
New
out,
York National
there
Guard.
were deaths.
Once
in
they got
the
to
regiment.
France, they learned their new
This
designation
is
was
the
the
record of William
369th
Hellickes.
U.S. Infantry.
William Hellickes was part of the extended Mondor family of the Prattsville-Roxbury area.
Upon
And
their
this is a
return,
little detail of the Prattsville
they were
map,
feted
and it shows what
by
was called the Sippy
the
Place.
entirety of New York
That was
City
his
and the New York
his
State
ancestral
government.
grandmother, Sophia.
As mentioned, as
Hellickes,
Adrian mentioned earlier,
nicknamed Sippy.
about 1,200 or so
And
of the original
William was
regiment
living in Catskill.
returned home.
He was the
However,
great grandson of Sippy.
during the war, about 2,500
he was the grandson of
replacement
Alexander
troops
Hellickes, a
had
Civil War
joined the
veteran,
regiment
and
while they were serving on the front
grandnephew
lines.
of
So when they came home,
another
they had
Hellickes,
about
who was at Galveston,
3,000
Texas,
soldiers
on June 19,
and about
1865,
100 officers,
which of course has given us.
and this is the Grand
Juneteenth.
Parade, which started down by 23rd
So,
Street.
military
They marched up
traditions
Fifth Avenue,
run
past the
long
New York
and,
Public Library,
in that family.
all the way up Fifth Avenue.
Now, the
to
thing
Harlem.
about William was,
And when they
people
got to Harlem,
assume he
they
died
opened up their
in
ranks
training camp,
so that family
which is
members
not the
could
case.
join in the parade.
if you look his records up
and
on
Ancestry.com,
mothers
you'll
and
see
wives
that
and
he
sweethearts
died
could
in
hug
Wilkesboro, New
their
York.
men on the 6th of September,
there was,
1917. A few
Wilkesboro
incidents that were written about
is
at the
in that
time.
little
When
dotted
women
area
would be holding up babies or
on the
young
left,
children,
and the women saying,
and
"There's your
it's
daddy, there's your
above,
daddy." So
Ticonderoga,
before
Fort
the men
Henry,
shipped out, some of
and
them
before
had
you get to
fathered
Plattsburgh.
children.
So
The company was divided into
they're marching in
platoons,
a
and the
formation
platoons
that
were
Americans
guarding
had never
railroad
seen before,
bridges, which were
This is
deemed
called
to
the
be
French
key
phalanx
points of potential sabotage
method of
by the
marching.
enemy.
It's very impressive.
This is a picture
The
of
band,
World War II.
the
folks,
parade was led
including
by Jim
Williams'
Europe's regimental band, cousin,
not only the 40
Charles
piece band,
Hellickes,
which was
a
famous
cousin
in
of
Europe,
the
but it
following
was joined by
generation,
all
of
the
course.
company
Charles
buglers,
Hellickes,
and
so
that's
Charles
it was a
Hellickes
60-man band
at
marching
the bottom
up Fifth
in the middle.
Avenue,
and
the
he
entire
lived
parade
in
was
Hunter.
preceded
And
by
when
the
I gave a
band
Mondor
of
program
the New
a
York
couple of years
City
ago,
Police Department.
people who knew him,
I might add,
expressed
after the
the
war,
fact that
several
they
of
had
these
known
men
him and
joined the New York
I
City
were
Police
very
Department,
proud to have known him
along
and
with
his
other
family.
civil service jobs. So, of course, New York, the
we're
U.S.
back in
Army, rather,
Albany.
in its wisdom, decides to send the regiment down.
The
with
story on the
27th
left is very
Division of New
interesting.
York State,
April
which consisted of other New York State
17,
National Guard
Soldiers
regiments,
will stage
and they send them
battle
down
into
into
the
the
hotbed
hotbed of Jim
This
Crowism
is in Albany
in
and
Lincoln Park.
secession of a generation
They
earlier.
staged a
down
mock
at
battle in
Spartanburg
Lincoln Park,
South Carolina.
including, you'll see
Unlike
highlighted, including
most
men of
histories that talk about this time,
infantry.
the town
The only
generally
problem
welcomed
was
them.
people
The
in the
mayor,
crowd were getting wounded because
Chamber
they
of
were
Commerce
using live
welcomed
ammunition.
these men.
You're not
However,
supposed to use live
they were
ammunition
rednecks
when you're
who did
staging
not
a mock
welcome
battle.
them.
And there were
But
several
There
incidents
may still to this day in
Albany's
racially
Lincoln Park
motivated.
be
On the whole,
rounds
however,
from
they were
Springfield
welcomed in this
1903's
community
littered
because they
somewhere
were,
in the earth of Lincoln
troops
Park.
serving the United States.
The
Middle
one day
article
Noble Sissel went into a
is
local hotel
about
to get a New York paper.
the hero's welcome.
He was assured by a
to Henry
local
Johnson,
black
community member.
member.
No,
His
it's okay.
nickname
You
was
can go to
Black
buy paper
Death
because he
Well,
had
when Noble Sissel
killed
walked
four
into the
Germans
hotel
single-handedly.
The
Now,
hotel
I'll talk about
proprietor
Henry Johnson in a little
said,
bit.
"Get the hell out,
but,
you blankety blank."
Kicked him in the
The
rear
city
end.
went wild
and-
over Henry
and
Johnson.
a New York
bent over backwards
officer,
to
a white officer from another regiment,
was reading
help him
in the lobby. He saw
and-
that. He got
and
up and he accosted
make him
the
a
hotel
true
owner.
hero. Other white
But
New Yorkers
there's
came
always
to the hotel and
problems
were
with
threatening to tear it
celebrity.
down. When
So here on April 6,
Lieutenant
1919,
James
on the
Reese
right,
Europe,
Jim
New
Europe
Negro
post
came
to be
in,
instituted,
called everybody
named
to
for
attention,
Major
and
Laurel
quelled the
Spencer.
disturbance.
By the way,
But
Spencer
with the
commanded
fear
the
of
Southern
Second
troops
Battalion and Northern Black troops,
and while they were
encamping
crossing
together,
the
the regiment
Demois
was
River
immediately sent overseas
as part of the Musogol offensive,
He caught 6
And
machine gun
because of
bullets
that,
in
they
his
were the
leg.
first
He just
100,000
zipped right up his
to
leg.
arrive in
And
France.
needless to say,
Now,
he walked with a limp ever after that.
On the right
but
is
Lord
the
Spencer was
little
a
remembrance
very
of an
well-respected
English boy.
man by the
And
men.
he talks about
Not
the
that well
Yanks and
respected
who
by
are the
his fellow
Yanks.
officers,
And
but
he
that's
says,
another
you know,
story.
the Yanks are everybody.
So,
they're English, they're French,
following
there's some of this, there's some of that.
the
There are
Spencer
black
Post,
Yanks, there are white Yanks. But
it
they're
was
all
still
Yanks.
active well into the
And of course,
1940s.
our great song that everybody knew was
The problem was,
we won't
as
come back
with
till it's over
vets
there.
of World War One,
by
vets of World War
Cohen.
Two, and
So very
the Korean
patriotic.
War. Generations pass, and when generations pass,
Now
there's no
let's see if we can get this
longer
going.
the groups or organizations that they once belonged to and had founded. So that post
These
no
are just a
longer
little
exists.
snippet
Now
of
here
action in World
is
War One.
Dr. John A. Jamieson. On the left is an article from 1948 about civil rights viewed by the panel today. He was 60 years old at the time. And down in the middle of the second paragraph, well, I'll start, sponsored by the University of Utah Sociological Society. The discussion will cover racial, social, and economic implications of civil
Turn the
rights.
sound off.
John
These
A.
are trenches in
Jamieson
the area,
will present the Negro's outlook.
and
Dr. Jamieson led a highly successful, multifaceted
And
life.
the blue
upon
lines
his
are
return.
German trenches, the red lines are French
Here's his
trenches.
obituary from
This is 90
1950.
miles east of Paris.
Dr. John Alexander
And you can
Jamieson,
see how
62, former
honeycombed the
trainer
whole
for the New
area
York
is.
Giants baseball
And
team,
I'm just going to
died
have to take a
Saturday.
moment and
Now,
get this
here's a
thing to turn
little
off.
monkey wrench. In records after the war, some
were
men
successful.
were identified as
This is the
Caucasian.
area. The
or white.
Oran is to the
I
to
don't
the east.
know
This
if
is the area of
reporter got the information wrong,
Champagne in French,
if,
Champagne in French.
Jameson,
And again, you can see how
clearly he wasn't passing
honeycombed
white
this area is
since 2 years
with
before he was
trenches.
representing
The forward
the
trenches, the
African-American point of
secondary
view.
trenches, the
I
communication
think
trenches,
probably
the
the
rear
copy
line trenches,
editor got
trenches
it wrong.
everywhere.
He was not born in Denmark.
This is a wartime map.
He was born in Washington,
This is
D.C.
an area
He lived in
where the
Saratoga
369
Springs.
served.
After the war,
This is the area
he
called
became the
Massige.
trainer for the New York
And there were
Giants
French
for many
trenches
years.
all through this area.
He was a founding member of
The blue
all
lines
black
are the German trenches.
golf club
And Ville
in Westchester
Saturbe is a
County
little village
in the
there.
1930s.
I have been blessed to
Eventually,
be
he
able to
moved
visit
out
there
to
twice,
Arkansas,
most recently with my granddaughter.
and finally out
and last
to
April.
Utah.
These words are
So,
called the in English
there is Dr.
boys de
Jameson,
Hazy. In
a
French,
very nice
Bois de
photograph
Hazy.
of him,
And this
and
is
that
the
was the
area
same
where
man
the Hell Fighters were stationed
hoisted up on the lamppost
2 months
in Paris,
in
July
this
4th,
area,
1918,
and then later
that we
over
had
in
seen
this area.
previously.
So this is a 1915 painting of the Bois de Hazy. Wars.
The Ferme de
Create a lot of
Montplaisir
issues
is the
for
yellow
men.
area on the left.
Of course,
That
PTSD. I have a funny story, which
Here's
I won't
a
go
man,
into
Frank
more
Griffin.
details. The farm is no longer there. And I
he
stopped and asked
served
people
in
where
Company
the
C.
farmhouse was, and they didn't know what the heck I was
he was
talking
wounded
about because it no longer
during
stands.
the war,
But we did figure out where
and
it stood.
unfortunately,
And
in
Henry Johnson and
1932,
Needham Roberts
in
were
Prattsville,
on
New
station on a
York,
listening post over in this
he
area.
committed suicide
A little village called Mills of Court,
after he set
which is
fire
now
to his home, which
vanished
burned to the ground.
because of disease after the
He
war.
was a member of the Order of
And
the
the,
Purple Heart.
The
His
on
medal,
or in the river
his medal, together
flows
with
in
other
this
military
area.
articles, were found
But
near
this
him
is the
with a
Bois de
note
Hazy, where the
instructing that they be
369th
turned
was
over
stationed.
to the James W. Francis of
This
Francis of
is a photograph
Wyndham,
from 1915.
State Junior
This is
Vice
Ville
Commander of
Saturbe
the
right here.
VFW.
Most of the buildings have been
And
demolished.
He was given
This
a
standing
full
building is the
military
church.
burial.
These are the French trenches
We
here.
don't know
with the,
why, other than
access
just
trenches.
most likely
And you can
post-traumatic stress
see
disorder.
The blue line
It's
up here are the
unfortunate,
German trenches
but
that are shown, not the French.
Many of
The
these
369th
men
was stationed
went
in
through
this
such things,
area
including several of
once
the Hell
they
Fighters
left
as
the
well,
Bois de Hazy area,
including Needham Roberts,
which was very
and Henry
close
Johnson,
by the way.
and Sergeant William Butler.
They
all had very
routinely
tragic ends.
find dead soldiers to this day.
However,
in this area,
I will give a caveat.
Thousands
Most of the men
died in this particular
overwhelming
area.
majority
During
of the men went on to lead very productive useful lives.
This is a
back in
map
their
made by an
communities.
American officer, Lieutenant
Accountants,
Landon,
dentists,
Harold Landon.
medical doctors,
The
civil
area
servants,
with the light coloring
entertainers,
are the
etc.,
American
etc.,
or the
etc.
Allied lines, including the Americans. There's Ville-sur-Turbe again. So
That's
there's
the
Calvert.
program.
These are the
If
German
anybody
ones.
has any questions, I'd be more
And
than happy
every
to
night,
answer them.
Every night there would be raiding
So just
parties
let me
back
know.
and forth, back and forth, back and forth, looking to capture prisoners. And there's Mont Plaisir.
Thank you very much, Richard. wow.
And this is
That's an
the
awful lot
approximate
of
location
amazing
where
people that
Johnson
were
and Roberts
connected
were stationed at a
upstate
forward post
and
when they were
went off to
attacked
do
by
such
about
wonderful
24
things.
Germans in a
Wow,
raiding
and
party.
gave their lives.
And Johnson
I
and
had a
Roberts, particularly
question.
Johnson, were able to beat them back,
the soldiers
four,
were African
wounded several
American.
more,
Were their
and the Germans
officers white?
retreated after
That's
cursing
a
at
very
the
good
Americans in
question,
perfect
Ingrid.
English. So, when the regiment was formed, well, the quick answer, yes, there were about 6 black officers in the regiment.
Okay.
Now I'm just trying
What
to
happened
advance the
was,
photo.
in the Army, you have to follow regulations. To be an officer, you have to pass an
And
officer's
It's not
test.
advancing for
There
some
were
silly
not
reason.
many men qualified who could pass an officer's test.
Uh,
Lieutenant Europe
I'm gonna have to go
did.
to.
He did pass an officer's test. There and we go. became Okay. became an officer.
Technology. I
One
love it.
officer was left
So after
behind
the war,
to create an
Sergeant John
ersatz
Jamieson of
battalion
Saratoga
of
Springs,
this
along with
regiment
other comrades,
back
wrote
in
a
New York
book
City.
right after they got
Uh,
home in early 1919.
Other black
Complete
officers
history
of the
of the colored
regiment.
soldier.
In August of
There
1918,
is Sergeant John Jameson.
General Pershing came to the decision
up on a lamppost in
that
Paris.
regiments will
Black regiments
with
will
whom he
either have all
identifies
white
as the
or all black
daughter
officers
of the president of
The
France.
feeling
I don't
being
know if that's
accurate,
that a black officer
but
in a white
John
regiment would not
Jameson
receive the
was
respect
a
of the
very
men,
vociferous
but
writer
in the black
of
regiment,
the activities of this
it would
regiment.
not be
He
unusual
went
for
on
there to be
speaking
white
tours,
officers,
because that's
and he
just
had
the
a
structure
very
of the Army
long,
at the time.
successful career.
So, in sports
all
medicine,
but Jim Europe were
Veterans Affairs,
transferred
and as a
to
civil
the
rights leader,
370th Regiment,
as he went
which was
through
a
life.
sister regiment to this.
So
This is a map of the
And when
area.
they
Got back to the states,
and
they
I do this
all
particularly for
got
the
back
next
together.
slide. This is
and,
Massage.
lived their lives, and
Ville-sur-Turbe
is over here to the right. Marshal
and
Bonaparte,
over
Napoleon
in
Bonaparte
this
Marshal was
area,
one.
right?
Lincoln Reed was
right over in
one.
this area.
There were about 6 men.
Jameson
who
was with
were
a soldier
officers with the regiment,
who
whose story
that ended
will
up being
read in
transferred
just
a
a
moment.
moment towards the end of the war. So
Did some of
This
the
is a
men who
story,
served in World War I end up
part
in
of
World
that
War
book I
II
just
as
showed
well?
you. Another great one, yeah, about
the
Master
death
Sergeant
of
Private
Chauncey
James
Cooper,
Turpin, who
and I'm
served
just
with
going to
the
read part of
regiment in
the
right-hand
because
paragraph.
the regiment's
It was
commander
while doing this
World
sort
War
of
II.
duty that I saw my first comrade
Chauncey
killed,
Hooper.
James Turpin.
A
Just taken our
reporter
places
who
for
had
duty
met
in
the men in
observation
France
posts
in World War
I had warned Turpin about
interviewed
putting
the
his head
same
out the
unit
door.
during World War II.
I was standing
and there
inside
he spotted
looking through my
many
glasses,
men
watching the Germans who
who
were
had
mending their barbed wire.
he had personally
When the Germans
met
suddenly
20
began
years
to
earlier.
shell our sector very heavily.
So
We
yes.
could not locate the angle
Amazing.
from which
That's
they were
amazing.
fighting because they were using
Let's
gas.
see, I have a couple
we
of
were
other
forced to
questions,
put
but
on
I'm
our
just
gas
trying to see,
masks.
I
At
don't
that moment,
think I
there was
see
no
any
way to get the information back
questions
to the
here.
intelligence
Let me
department,
just double
where
check.
such information was always wanted.
But if
So
people
we were
want
forced to
to
remain there.
unmute themselves.
I had just told Turpin
and,
that he would lose our dinner because we could not go out on account of the heavy bombardment.
Also
Turpin
open
replied,
up their
"All right,
videos. They
buddy,
can
I will stay." The
talk
shelling
directly
kept
with
kept
Richard.
up 2 or 3 more hours.
So I encourage
more,
anybody who would
and
like
just when we
to
thought they were through,
ask a
Turpin said that he
question
wanted some
directly. You
water.
don't have to filter it
He
through
started
me
out the door, but I called him
wait.
back.
Just
He turned around to me and said,
just
"Are you
sing
afraid,
out.
Jimmy?
Just
Those
unmute
are only little
yourself
ones," referring to the shells.
and start
And none of
speaking.
them have my name
Is there
marked on
anybody
them.
out there that wants
These were the last
to ask
words
a
he
question
uttered.
of Richard?
Handing me my glasses, he stepped outside, and the next moment I felt something warm splashing over my body.
I just want
There
to
was
make
my
a
comrade,
comment
lying a
that
short distance from
I
my
was
feet.
surprised to
His
see
head had been shot from his
um,
body and lay to one
video
side.
footage,
His-
moving
The
pictures
poor boy's blood
from
was
World
splattered
War
all
I.
over my body.
Really surprised me.
That, yes, is a photograph. Well, of the body. I'm not surprised. Well, first of all, the
of
American Army
James
had
Turpin.
what was called the Signal Corps. And
To
you
the
can go
right
on the National Archives
is his
website
dog
and
tag.
type in 369th,
Each
etc.
company had a
The
medical
other black
officer
regiments, other white
assigned
regiments,
to it.
and there are they made
the,
movies.
first
They shot
battalion
footage. Was Dr. William
um,
Keenan, a Quaker, what was really
It was-
exciting
The doctor's
was
duty
the
to
French
collect the dog tags
archives
of dead soldiers.
had that front line
This dog tag
footage.
ended up
The
in a
Signal
box
Corps
of
footage
World War
of
I
America.
knickknacks.
They
at
were
a
all
flea
while they
market.
were doing garrison
Somebody
duty
posted it
or in
online,
rare areas,
and of course,
of the
through
war.
research,
The
I
French
came
footage,
across it,
they're right up there in the
and that
combat
dog
zone.
tag was on
So
the body.
it's very
of
exciting
James Turpin,
because you see
whom you see
how
to
the men are
left.
acting, how they're interacting, what they're wearing. The whole milieu
Now, this
is well, they
going
say
to
a picture's
be
worth 1,000
just
words.
some images
So a moving picture is worth a
of
million.
the 369th from French archives. These are
I was
actually
impressed
men of the
with the quality
316th,
of
while
the
on
of the
July
images
22nd,
of the
1918.
films. I thought that they were like,
You
oh
can
my
see the
God,
men
you know,
and their
almost like
officers
just
are all
yesterday.
around.
Right, right.
They're sharing the
Quite,
same water
That was
source
interesting.
for bathing or washing up.
Are there any other questions? Anybody?
These are men in the secondary
Yes?
trenches.
Yeah, hi, this is Paul up here.
They're not on the frontline trenches. This was just after a major
There were two
German
things I
assault
thought might
on
be
July
interesting
15th,
if
by the way.
Rich could address them. One is in
And
talking about black officers. General Pershing
let's see if I can
earned the
advance it.
nickname Black Jack.
Yep, here's a patrol coming back. Now, what's
as a
interesting is some of the
consequence
men are
commanding
wearing American
black
gear, and
troops.
some of them are wearing their
And I
French
was wondering
gear,
if you could expound
which
on that a
means the
little
men
bit.
with the American
And
gear
the second
are
was
replacement troops.
Henry Johnson's
And
award,
there's a soldier
was
loading
upgraded
ammo
to the Medal
into
of
a
Honor
clip
a
of
number
a
of years
Shosho
ago.
automatic rifle.
and I thought that might be an interesting upgrade as well.
Certainly. I'm glad you
Now,
brought up
they were
both
on
of
these
those.
trenches,
First of all, from April
Black Jack
until
Pershing's original nickname
September
was the
1918.
N-word Pershing, because
The
he commanded the Black
Meuse
Regiment
offensive
out west
kicked off on September
as a younger
26th.
officer.
You may
But
have
the
heard
papers
of the
thought
Lost
that would not
Battalion.
be
You may have heard of
appropriate
Sergeant Albert
in
York.
articles.
That
so
was
they
about
changed
5
that
miles
word
to the
to
east
black,
of where these men were
and
serving.
that's how it became Black Jack Pershing.
This is a
He had
painting
great
by
respect
Horace
for black
Pippin
troops.
of Goshen,
He was
New
of the
York, a
opinion
native
that
New
black
Yorker.
troops,
He
if properly
made many
officered,
paintings and
were
sketches of
wonderful
his time in
soldiers.
war.
Now, of course, we
And
knew
this
that
is the
from the
assault
lessons
on
of the Civil War,
Bellevue
and the Spanish-American
Bridge.
War.
This
So
is a close-up,
one of
slightly
the
lightened up.
mythologies
Here the
of
Americans have their
period
Brody helmets
this that has sprung up
They have their French
is that
label.
Americans
for
cross
the Army didn't
straps.
think black
Men would
They have
fight.
blanket rolls
Total
instead of
hogwash.
knapsacks.
Everybody
like,
knew
Civil
that,
War or
that black men
Spanish
had
American
fought
War days,
heroically
and
from
they're
the
doing
American
hand-to-hand
Revolution
combat with the
all the way
Germans.
down to the Spanish-American War. So the Army was segregated because its
This
officer
is
corps was predominantly
a wartime
Southern
map
of their military
annotated
traditions that
with
we
the
probably
movements
are
of the
all
troops.
familiar with.
And the troops were coming
So
from
Pershing
to the bottom
had
of the
nothing but
map
high praise for black
up
troops.
to Bellevue
And,
Signal Ridge, which is
he
this ridge right here.
Knew Hayward, and
The
he
316th
was very
was the
familiar with
Capture
this
Show.
regiment. By the
The
way, the band
370th of this
second,
regiment
another
was,
fellow black regiment,
considered
considered
to be the best U.S.
71st
Army
another black
band of
regiment,
the entire
were
war.
part of this assault
of all the
and the
hundreds of regiments
369th
that served,
did
including
finally,
many
after
black
5 days of
regimental
combat,
bands
of
This was
advancing
considered the
forward
best.
about 6 miles,
Now,
they finally
about
captured
Henry
Sisho.
Johnson,
I'm glad you brought that up.
and this is how it looks to this day.
So the man, the legend,
There's
the Henry Johnson was a
east
very
ridge of
mild
the
man.
Bellevue
He
Signal
delivered
Ridge.
coal in Albany, going
There's
house to
Sisho,
house. He was not a red
and
cap
at this
porter.
corner
That's another
is the
myth.
monument to the 369th Infantry.
People just made assumptions
there
that he was
in,
from Albany and
on
he was a red cap
Armistice
porter.
Day
He
November
delivered
11th
coal for a living.
in 2022.
He was from North Carolina.
And,
He spoke
every
with
year,
a
the
North
village puts
Carolinian
on
accent.
ceremony
honoring
of
the
Mark
369th
369th at that monument.
You know,
every
the
single
Southern
year
dialect by both
since
blacks and
World
whites
War I.
is quite different than Northern dialects. So now he did his heroic deed along with Native
C
Roberts,
Company,
part of the 1st
He
Battalion.
was severely wounded.
Had been in reserve.
He
during
chose
the
to stay with the
advance.
regiment rather than being
And
discharged.
on the afternoon of July
And,
29th, they
he
pushed
became
off
sort of
Bellevue
the
Signal
icon
Ridge
for the
across that
regiment.
open plain.
Its most
and
famous
attacked
member,
Sisho
certainly,
next to
each
along
building
the,
in
from
Sisho
Europe harbored a machine
But
gun nest at the
as
windows
time
within
went
the
on
building.
and he got back to the States,
And this
the legend
excerpt
began to
is
grow.
from Major
He
Arthur Little,
defeated
who wrote a
40
book
Germans.
called From
He
Harlem
killed
to the
30
Rhine.
of them.
And
He
I
there was
highlighted
money
Company
raised
C.
to buy
Company
a
C had
house.
gone into
There
and was
were
working its way
handlers
through the middle
or
section of the town
grifters
that attached
Company
themselves
D
to him,
was
that
advancing
siphoned
through
off
the
his
right
money.
border streets.
He
Both
was
of these
under
companies
the care of
were
a
meeting,
manager who booked him
with resistance.
talking
Company
tours,
B was
lecture
entrenched
tours
near
around
the
the
southern
country
edge and the left of the
and
town. In one
There was no
account,
fighting being
Henry
offered at their front.
what arrived in a
Bates,
Midwestern
a captain,
place
reported
with
to me
a suit.
that he was
and a
holding his
bowler hat
company
and a
intact,
big fat cigar sticking
so
out of
as
his
to be
mouth,
available
and he was
for a special
he was playing the part
reinforcement
of a
if one should
celebrity
be needed.
kingpin. And his
The
manager
support elements were
was
entrenched
along the
with
lines
me
of
in a
Don
roadside
King,
ditch,
folks from
bounding
Don King
the
of the
southern
boxing world.
edge of the town.
He was used.
He
And
was
again,
used.
the
Now,
regiment, heroic,
the first battalion,
brave,
pushes off of this
deserving
ridge
of the Medal
on
of
the
Honor,
afternoon,
100%.
3 in the afternoon on September
But what we
29th.
now see
After
on
heavy
the
resistance,
internet, and by the way,
about Henry Johnson,
I was up on that ridge,
is highly
and
mythologized.
in this wood line,
he,
there are
he
still German trenches,
deserved the Medal
barbed
of Honor,
wire,
and it was long
and over
past overdue
on
for
this
him to
road
receive
below it.
If you have any other
Still
questions,
to this day
I'd be
is a
happy to
German
answer them
pillbox
about Henry.
from the war, and it's to show
But are there any additional questions?
this
Any other
C
thoughts,
company
comments?
went into the middle part of the village.
Because we're just a little bit after 8 o'clock and there's-
And this is just an
Yes,
AI
yes.
illustration.
I am going to show
of what
one more
it
thing.
may have looked
Okay.
like. Back in November of 2020,
So
at Main
every month,
Siege, which is a
each
reconstructed
company
or
had a
restored rather
roster
French trench
taken.
where the Hell Fighters served,
And this is the roster for
this helmet was
September
found there.
1918 for
Tens of
Company
thousands of
C.
artifacts have been pulled from
It's
there.
about 5 or 6
And
pages
the
in length.
director
I only
of
did
that
the
restoration
restoration
cover
was
in
kind
one
enough
page
to give me this helmet.
But you can
This
see
is a French Adrian
on
helmet,
the
the
listing
type
of
the
the
Hell Fighters
men
wore for their first several months
all the men
in combat.
and the right-hand
So
column
I'm not saying this
that are
was worn
listed
by
as
a
wounded.
Hellfighter.
I am saying
Now,
this
what's
was
interesting
a
and a little
helmet in the
frustrating,
area where the
they
Hellfighters
did not
served.
mark who was killed
So,
on
I'm
these
very,
rosters. You have to go
privileged
to other
to hold
records
this
for
piece
that.
of history.
So
very interesting. That's
the
fantastic.
September
Well, if there are no other
19,
questions, I just want to say that
18
there's
roster for C
more
Company.
uh,
They had 3 officers
information
and
about Black
190
History
men they
Month
went into battle with.
activities, and one is
Of that
taking
number,
place at the
62
New York
were wounded.
State Museum
From
and
other
Cultural
records, we know
Education
that
Center this
11 were
month. It's
killed
entitled, it's
or
an
mortally
exhibit
wounded.
entitled
That's
Embattled.
39%
The New York State Archives
casualties.
and New York
Almost
State
4 out of 10
Libraries
men
manuscripts
was a
and special
casualty.
collections are
The
presenting a
regiment,
joint
overall, the regiment
display that
lost
focuses on the
about 800
achievements of
men in
Black
taking in
military.
this drive. It was part of
Oops,
the
lost my
the
page
Meuse
here.
offensive of
Excuse me, Black
September 1918.
military regiments and their fight for equality on and off the battlefield. The display features a variety of images, letters, government documents,
one
and
of the
other
men
records from the Civil
from
War,
our area
World War I and
was
World War
Roy
II eras,
Baker,
and are
and he
showcased on the
enlisted at
11th floor
Peekskill.
lobby of the Cultural Education Center this month. You can go
Yep,
to
he
the State
enlisted at
Museum,
Peekskill on May 15th. That's the same day that
nysvd.gov
several men
to
from C Company from
find out
Albany
more about that
enlisted
exhibit.
in
But
the
it
regiment.
looks like it would be very
They all
interesting.
took the train down. They
Well,
went to the
thank you
camp.
so much, Richard,
they
and
signed
thank you
up
everyone
there
for
at the
attending
camp.
tonight.
There was one man,
Stay tuned for
Carl
more programs
Vroman.
that will be announced
I'll
in
mention
the
him now.
future. We don't have
Carl
another Zoom
Vroman
coming up,
lied about his
but
age.
there will be other
He was born
in-person
in
programs that we're
1901,
working on that should be
and
very,
he
very
enlisted
interesting and
in
exciting.
1917 at the age of
And so
16.
stay tuned.
He had
And thank you
backdated
very
his
much
birth by 2
for your
years.
interest in this.
So
and
he
thank
told
you
them he
very
was
much, Richard.
18.
Thank you,
He died in
Adrian, and Jessica. Thank you
1974 to everyone. So
Absolutely.
Carl Vroman,
So it's, I
was
bid everyone
16.
good night. And I
Needham
guess,
Roberts,
Jessica, you
who
can
was in the
end
dugout with
program.
Henry Johnson, he was only he was
Well,
15 when he joined
I'm
them.
very delighted to
So
welcome
a
everyone
lot of
this evening.
underage men
Thank you very
served,
much for
not
joining
only
us
in just in
tonight.
this regiment, but
This is our
in the
first
Army
program
in
of our
general.
52nd
As long as you
season.
had weight
And so
and
we're
to
very
pass for
excited
18,
about having it
you were
start
mustered
out
in.
Tonight with this presentation.
So unfortunately,
Probably most
for,
people are
Roy
familiar
Baker,
with the Historical Society.
he
We're
died
located
in
at the top of
June
the Catskill
of
Close.
accidental
Oh, I think I
wounds.
forgot to introduce
There's
myself.
no other
I'm Adrienne
record
Laris, the
about
president of the
whether
Historical
it
Society.
was another soldier
Um,
shot him by
And
accident. or
our
he was
mission
cleaning
is
his
to
weapon, he was
discover,
shot.
preserve, interpret, and
It's kind of hard to
share
clean a
the
rifle and
unique
shoot
history
yourself.
of the
So
Catskill
I'm
Mountain
assuming
region. We have a
or
50-acre
presuming
campus. We are
that another soldier
the home of the
accidentally shot him.
1913 Ulster and Delaware train
And
station
he was
on the
from
National and
Rensselaer, New York.
Historic national
he's
and
buried
state historic
at the,
registries. We have an archive that contains some
Algon
7,000
Cemetery,
artifacts. We're the
Mount
western
Faucon, Mont
trailhead
Faucon,
of the
Mount
Catskill
Falcon,
Rail Trail.
over just north of Verdun.
It
Huge
leads
American
past our
cemetery.
train station all the way out
I
to the
forget the
viewing
exact number, but
platform
there's
for the
probably
Catskill
20 or
Falls.
30 Hellfighters buried in the cemetery,
A
maybe
full
more.
list of our programs for
Many were
2025 will
returned to
be
the States,
available
but
on our
most of them
website as soon
remain
as the
buried in
details are
France.
set, and we're working on that now. You can also check us out on Facebook and Instagram for
So,
postings
as the
and
war is winding
updates as well.
down,
I'd like to
and
extend a special thank you to
the
the
Albany
Mountaintop
Argus
Historical Society members who are
is proud
participating
of
this
its
evening.
young
Our
men,
members are important
including Henry
partners in the work of the
Johnson.
Mountaintop Historical Society.
And
I'd also like to thank the
this
Bank
is
of Greene
the
County
banner
for their
headline
support of
from
our
November
programming
15th. The
and
demand that
Stewart
Kaiser be
Shops
taken
for
grows.
supporting
New
digital
honor for
access
Albany,
to this program.
Negroes.
Tonight, in honor of Black History
And
Month, we are
at the
pleased to
left
present the
is
Harlem
from the
Hell
same
Fighters
page,
from the
Colored
North
Fighters
Country,
of
a
Henry
talk by
Johnson's
Richard
unit
Sears
is reclaimed
Walling.
province with 7th
The
French
Harlem Hell
Army
Fighters were
on
an
Tuesday.
African-American
So they're serving
infantry
with the French
regiment in the New
Army
York
in
Army
Alsace-Lorraine
National Guard during
as
World
the
War
war
I
comes to an
and World
end.
War II.
What
The
had happened
story
was
of the
when
local
the
men of the
regiment
Harlem
got to
Hell Fighters,
France,
the most famous regiment
it was an
of the
orphan
American
regiment. It
Army
was not
during
part of a
World
division.
War I, will be
It was
shared
not part of a
tonight.
table of organization
In
within the
addition
U.S.
to
Army,
better-known
which is
heroes
highly
such as
structured.
Sergeant Henry
When the
Johnson
racial
of
incidents had
Albany,
occurred
there were
in
men
South
from
Carolina
our area, including
and up in
Sergeants
Jersey
Carl and
with
Harrison
Alabama
Vroman of
troops,
Schoharie
where the
and
Alabamians swore that they would fight
Jamieson of
the
Saratoga
black
Springs.
soldiers.
The regiment went overseas in
The
1917
colonel,
with an
Colonel
original
Hayward, went to
complement
the War Department and said, look,
2,200
if you want
men
blood here in
and
America, we
76
can have that.
officers, and
Or
returned in
you can send my regiment to France.
1919 with
We'll do whatever
1,200
it
men
takes. Just
and
get us to
35
France.
officers of that
So
group.
the Army
Their
took him at his
heroism
word.
in
By the way,
France
he had been
earned them
a
the
student
immortal
under General Pershing
nickname, the Harlem Hell
in an
Fighters.
ROTC program out in the Midwest. So
I'd
he
like
knew
to now
Pershing
introduce
personally and had a good
Mr.
relationship
Walling.
with Pershing.
You may be familiar
So,
with him and his
they get to
background. Last year,
France,
he presented a
after several
fascinating
attempts.
talk on the Mondor
Bad
family
ship
of
karma
Prattsville.
had kept them
He
from
grew up in New
landing
Jersey
earlier,
and
but they finally
presently
get to
makes his
France.
home in
The end
Stamford,
of
New
December
York. He is the son of 2
1917.
World War II officers
What people don't
and a
know
graduate
is
of
within
Rutgers
5
University.
days, they
He has
were
dedicated
officially
his life to
loaned
history,
to the French
historic
Army.
preservation, and
However,
humanitarian causes.
they worked
His
for
primary
2
work
months
is in African American
as
and Native American history and
pioneer engineer
genealogy.
troops.
He's
That's
the
a
author
polite
of
way of saying
numerous
they were
books,
used as
including
labor troops
My
to
Year in
build roads,
France,
to build a
about a Harlem
railroad,
Hell
to
Fighter,
build a dam,
and Edward
all
and
in
Eleanor and the
anticipation
Wages
of the
of Sin,
4
about the
million
infamous
Americans expected
1922
to
double
follow them in the
homicide
coming years.
of a minister and his
Now,
lover
only
in
2
New
million
Brunswick, New
Americans
Jersey.
were sent over
He is the
by the
recipient
time
of
the war
honors from
ended.
the Oliver
But
Cromwell Black
1919,
History
it was
Society
expected another
and the
2 million
Sons of the
Americans would
American
follow.
Revolution.
So these men,
Mr.
like many
Walling, if you
other
are
units,
ready,
both white and black,
please begin.
thank you very much, Asian conscripts.
First of all, I'd like to thank the
Asian
Historical
contract
Society
laborers,
for inviting me to
French
give this
civilians,
program.
Belgian civilians. They worked
I spent
as
a long
laborers
time
to build the
gathering
roads,
the
to build
various
the trenches,
facts from
to
various
build
locations.
railroads.
I'd like to thank
do
Jessica
anything that
for
an army
helping
needs
to
do,
coordinate
and that's what these
all of
men
the
did.
technical work and
The men thought that they were being abused
administrative
by being
details that
labor
go
troops,
into
but
these
Colonel
types of
Hayward
programs.
knew that they would soon be joining the French army.
Let's begin at the beginning.
What the men know and what the
Just
officers
by
know
way
are
of
2
personal
vastly
background,
different
my
things.
grandfather, my mom's
Some
dad,
people complained that they were used as stevedores.
U.S. Army
That
during
is
World
not
War I,
true.
but he did not
They
ship out overseas.
complained they were being used,
However,
as just
being a
regular old
resident
labor
in
troops.
the Albany
Not
area,
true.
he worked on the Hudson River
There's a
Line
title for that. Those
in the
kinds of men. They're called
1930s,
combat
40s,
engineers,
50s, 60s,
and that's what they were.
and
They were combat
as a
engineers
conductor,
doing
he
labor
knew
in building
and was
the
friends
infrastructure
with,
necessary for war.
reporters who worked at the station in Albany, and of course, many of the porters
The painting on the bottom
were
right
actually veterans, not
is
only
by a
of World War
well-known
I,
artist
but
whose
also
name
this
I
particular
forgot to
regiment.
write down, but a
So
well-known
through
American
my
artist.
familiar connection,
He went to France
with my
for
grandfather,
a couple of
I
months.
do
He
have
painted
that
many scenes of
relationship
American
to,
troops.
the story
here
of men
are,
of the North Country in the Harlem Hell
is a
Fighters.
painting rather of
So,
Colonel Hayward in
This
the
is
right
an
front
image of a
foreground.
late war battle scene with German
There's men
soldiers
passing
in
by
their
him.
stormtrooper tactics.
Hayward has on
advancing
his
through
left
shot and
shoulder
shell.
the patch
And a
of a
painting can only
rattlesnake
give
on
just
a black
the slightest
flight
background
ascend,
of
that
what
was
war
the
was really
unit's
like on the Western Front.
designation or the unit's insignia
On the left,
that
are
did
French
not come into
soldiers
being
with the
well
traditional
after the
Adrian
fighting
helmet,
ended.
firing
So,
version of the automatic rifle.
the
called a
common
show
soldier
show.
did not wear that
You can
patch
see the
until after they got to the United
semicircular clip
States.
there. On the upper right are French soldiers in their
As the
horizon
men go
blue
by,
uniform, a man in a brown uniform.
You see both the
which
American
represents
flag
their colonial
and the New York
troops from
State
North
flag.
Africa.
This
which
is the
consisted of
only
both,
regiment in the entire American
native-born,
army
that fought
Arabic,
under a
Moroccan,
state flag, and also
because they began
colonial settlers in
as the
North
15th
Africa.
New York National
And then
Guard.
on the bottom right,
Once they got to France,
battlefield dead with
they
crosses
learned their
of
new designation was
burials,
the 369th
right on the
US
battlefield.
Infantry.
So it was hell on earth during World War One. So North Country Hell Fighters,
Upon their return,
and there is our
they
area
were feted
with Schoharie and Albany and
the
Saratoga
entirety of
Springs,
New York City
circle,
and the New York State government.
And by way of background,
As mentioned, as Adrian
the
mentioned
15th New York
earlier,
National Guard
about
Regiment
1,200 or so
was
of the original regiment
advocated
returned home.
for many
However,
years prior to its formation.
during the war, the
about
growing black
2,500
community in New York
replacement
City,
troops, particularly in
had
Harlem,
joined the regiment
called for
while they were serving
on
on
the
the
unit.
front lines.
The leading men of that community.
So when they
called
came
for the
home,
unit,
they had about
including Charles
3,000 soldiers
who became a captain in this
and
unit,
about
and then
100
also transferred to the
officers.
370th
And
Regiment
this is
later
the
in
grand
war.
parade, which started
The
down
New
by
York
23rd
legislation
Street.
languished because there
They
was not
marched
a
up
big
Fifth Avenue past the
interest
New York
in
Public
other
Library,
than New York City
all
for
the way up
such a
Fifth
regiment.
Avenue to Harlem.
But
And when they got to Harlem, they opened up their ranks so that family members could join in the parade.
Of course, we had the
And,
rage by Pancho Villa,
mothers and wives
along the
and sweethearts
Mexican-U.S.
could hug
border.
their men.
Nothing is ever new under
Um,
the sun, apparently.
There was
and
a few
many
incidents
of
that
the
were written
New
of
York
at the time
regiments
when
went
women
down to
would
the
be
border,
holding up babies,
and it
or
was
young
realized that,
children.
oh gosh, we don't have
And the
any
women
of
saying,
the
"There's your
other
daddy, there's your
National
daddy."
Guard regiments
So,
in case of
before the men shipped
statewide
out,
emergencies.
some of them had
And
fathers.
so the
children.
creation of the 15th
So
was fast-tracked at that point.
they're marching
by
in a formation
1916.
that Americans had never seen before.
I'll only just
This is called the
mention
French
the first
phalanx.
part. They were changing demographics.
Method of
In
marching.
New York
It's
State
very impressive.
in 1890,
The band,
there were
the
6.9
parade was
million
led
whites
by Jim
and
York's
only
regimental
70,000
band.
African Americans.
Not only the
In
40-piece
1900,
band,
which was
there were
famous
9
in
million
Europe,
whites,
but it was joined
and
by all the company buglers.
134,000
So
African
it was a
Americans.
60-man
Almost
band
double in
marching
10 years,
up
Fifth Avenue.
And of course, that was part
And
of
the
Great
entire
Migration.
parade was preceded.
And then the other
by the band
details here
of the
are
New York
just particularly
City
about
Police
Manhattan.
Department.
And I will
I might
send
add,
this program
after the war,
as a PDF.
several of
to
these
Jessica.
men joined.
So if
the New York
anybody
City
listening
Police
this
Department,
evening or other members
along
of
with
the
other
society
civil
would like a
service
copy
jobs.
of it, they can contact Jessica a few days after this presentation for
So,
a copy of these
we're back
slides.
in Albany.
The story
One
on the
of the
left is
leading
very
men
interesting
of the
April
regiment
was
17
James Reese
1919.
Europe. He was
Soldiers
the
will stage
Jay-Z of his
battle
generation.
Bruce
He was the
Sloan.
leading
This is in Albany,
entrepreneurial
in Lincoln
musician
Park.
of his
They
generation
staged
in the
a
African
mock
American
battle
community.
in Lincoln Park.
And what he said basically
The
was,
o-
we're strangers in
including,
New
you'll
York.
see highlighted,
Joining the
including
regiment
men
will
of
be the means of
369th
forming
Infantry.
comradeship with some fine
The
young
only
men
problem
of the
was
city. People
New
in the
York
crowd
is a
were getting
peculiar
wounded
city
People are
because they were
clannish,
using live
and you
ammunition.
have a very small chance to meet
You're not
any of the
supposed to
fine
use live
businessmen
ammunition when
in
you're
the
staging a
city
mock
of
battle.
our race.
But they're
Skipping
may still
down,
to this day in
he
Albany's Lincoln
says
Park.
towards the end,
The
about 5
rounds
lines up, the
from
unit is being
Springfield,
promoted by the biggest men on
1903s
Wall Street.
littered somewhere.
We will
in the,
eventually have
the
a big
earth of
armory
Lincoln Park.
where the young men can have healthful exercise,
The
swimming
middle
pools, athletic training,
Article,
which will build up the manhood
is
of Harlem.
about
To accomplish
the hero's
these
welcome
results, the best
to Henry
and most
Johnson,
sincere, energetic men in the community
whose nickname
must
was
get
Black
in
Death,
the move,
because he had
and
killed
he ought to
4
know
Germans
because he was the
single-handedly.
Jazz King.
Now, I'll talk about Henry Johnson in a
When
little
America
bit,
went to war,
but,
particularly after the sinking of the Lusitania in
the city
1915,
went wild
and
over Henry Johnson.
we
and
declared
bent over
war against
backwards
Germany in
to,
April of 1917.
help
Black
him
Americans rallied to the
and-
flag as they had
and
done in all
make
previous
him a
wars.
true hero,
particularly the Civil
but
War
there's
and the
always
Spanish
problems
American
with
War.
celebrity.
And of course, there's an
So
image
here on
on the
April
left
6,
of a black
1919,
soldier
on the right, new
bearing
Negro
the
post to be
American flag,
instituted, named for
the
Major Lord Spencer.
By the way,
Leader
Spencer,
and
editor
commanded
of
the
the
NAACP,
Second Battalion,
W.E.B. Du Bois,
and
while they were crossing
basically
the
said in his famous
Demois
crisis
River,
speech
that this
as
is
part
the
of
crisis
news
of the
Gulf
world.
offensive,
he
and
caught
he
6
in
this
this
editorial
leg.
he urges
zip
the
right
black
up his
community
leg.
in America
And
with their very special
needless to say, he
grievances
walked with a limp
against
ever after that.
the general American
But
society
Lord
at the
Spencer
time to
was
put aside those grievances,
a very
and
well-respected
to fight
man
for liberty
by the men,
and democracy,
not that well-respected by his
in the
fellow
world
officers,
and also
but
here at
that's
home.
another story.
So prior to shipping out,
Following
the regiment was created
the
in
Spencer
June of
Post,
16 with the appointment of
it was
Colonel
still
William Bill
active
Hayward.
well into the 1940s.
He was the head of a commission in New York
was,
State,
as with
and was
vets
very
of World
friendly with the
War I
governor
and
at the
vets of
time.
World War II, and
It was recognized
the
in
Korean
1917 as a National Guard regiment by
generations
the federal
pass.
government,
and when generations
and
pass,
was at
there's
that
no
time
longer
at
the
1,216
groups or
officers and men.
organizations that they once
They only had
belonged
2
to.
weeks of rifle practice
and had
at
found it.
Peekskill in May,
So
and in July
that
they were
post
recruited
no
up to
longer
war strength
exists.
of over 2,000 men and 56 officers, and they were mustered
Now
in.
here is
The image at the right on the
Dr.
top is Bill
John
Hayward.
A.
He was the father
Jamieson.
of Leland Hayward, the very famous
On the
Hollywood
left
producer.
is
And
an article from
his granddaughter is
1948
Brooke Hayward,
about civil
who
rights viewed by the
wrote
panel
the
today.
book Haywire about
He
their
was
dysfunctional family.
60 years
But
old
that's
at the
another
time.
story for another day.
And,
And at the bottom
down
are
in
a
the
number
middle
of
of
the
the second
musicians of the
paragraph,
regiment.
well, I'll start.
These young men came
Sponsored
from
by
the
the University of
Institute
Utah
down
Sociological
in
Society.
southeastern Virginia.
The discussion will cover racial, social, and
Now, this is
economic
very
implications
interesting.
of civil rights.
Selected
John A.
African American
Jamieson
populations in the
will
North
present
Country.
the Negro's outlook.
The first column down
Dr.
are
Jamieson
the total amount of African
led
Americans.
a highly
The second column
successful,
are those identified
multifaceted
particularly
life
as black. Of course,
upon his return.
At that time, Negro was the
Here's
word
his
used.
obituary from
And
1950.
the third column are biracial.
Dr.
folks,
John
whether that's
Alexander
either
Jameson, 62,
white and
former
black,
trainer for the New York Giants
or
baseball
black and
team,
American
died
Indian,
Saturday.
but biracial folks.
Now,
within
here's
that
a little
total
monkey
African American
wrench.
paradigm.
In records
So
after
Albany
the
had the
war,
largest. Oh, these are
some
counties, by the way.
men
Albany had
were identified
1,162
as Caucasian.
with
or
the
white.
black population.
I don't know
far exceeding
if
the biracial
the reporter
population,
got the
and that
information
holds
wrong,
true for
if,
all of the other counties
Jameson
except Delaware
well,
County.
clearly he wasn't passing as
Delaware
white, as
County
since 2
had
years
only
before he was
96
representing
individuals
the African
identified
American
as
point of
black,
view.
and
I think probably the
130
copy
individuals
editor
identified
got
as
it wrong.
biracial.
He was not born
That
in Denmark.
Is an anomaly.
He was
And to
born in
double check
Washington,
that
D.C. He lived in
census
Saratoga
records
Springs.
were not transposed
After
in
the war,
published books.
He
I
became
went
the
back and
trainer
did a
for the New York
search,
Giants for
and
many
indeed,
years. He was
there
a founding
were
member
about
of an
90
all-black
some odd people
golf
identified as black
club in
and
Westchester County
130
in the
as
1930s.
biracial. So
Eventually, he
that
moved
has
out
a lot to do with
Arkansas,
families like the
and
Mondor
finally
family
out
that
to Utah.
Adrian mentioned before.
So
So you can see that even
there
up
is
here,
Dr.
the black
Jameson,
population, except for
very
Albany
nice photograph
County,
of him,
was relatively
and that
small.
was the same man hoisted up on the lamppost in Paris.
Now,
July
the
4th,
regiment was formed in June of 1916,
seen
and when
previously.
America declared war, it really ramped up its wartime recruiting. At the left, these
Now,
are from the Albany
wars
Argus newspaper, by the way. Create a lot of
April
issues for men.
1917,
The Albany Colored,
of course,
pardon me, the
PTSD.
Albany County Colored Republican Club
Here's a man,
is
Frank
enlisting
Griffin.
in the 15th Regiment National
Uh,
Guard under
he
Lieutenant Colonel
served in
Warlord
Company
Spencer,
C.
the military secretary
He was
to Governor
wounded
Whitman.
during the
On
war,
the top right,
and
a company
unfortunately,
of more than
in
100 men from the 15th
1932,
are doing guard
in
duty at
Prattsville, New
Mountain.
York,
And at
he
the bottom
committed
right
suicide
is July 1917.
after he set
25
fire
members
to
of
his
the
home,
15th
which burned
Regiment,
to the ground.
the only Negro
He
unit
was
in
a
state
member
service,
of the
Order
Order
of the
of the
Purple
City,
Heart, and that was in July.
His medal,
So
his medal,
Albany
together with other military
gave
articles, were
many
found
men
near
to
him
the regiment,
with a note
and
instructing
in
that
fact,
they be turned
Company
over,
C,
to
which
the
was
James W.
organized by
Francis,
Colonel
the
Spencer,
James W.
was
Francis
known as the
Wyndham,
Albany Company,
State
within
Junior
the regiment.
Vice Commander of the VFW, and he was given a full
Now, this is a list. I'm not going to go
military
through each and every
burial.
single man, but I'll leave this up for
We
just
don't know
a few
why,
moments.
other than
the first two
just
columns
most
are
likely
men from
post-traumatic
Albany.
stress disorder.
Going
It's
down the
unfortunate,
first column, we see
but
George Morgan.
Many
He
of
was
these
born in Cobleskill.
men went through such things, including
Robert
several
Watkins
of the
was
Hell
a Southern
Fighters as well,
transplant, including
But
he
Edith
was living at the
Roberts
time
and Henry
originally
Johnson
in Great Barrington
Sergeant
and
William
then
Butler.
in Albany.
all had very tragic
The
ends.
men whose names are in bold
However,
and italic were those men
and
who
we'll give a
died
caveat,
during the war.
most of the men,
including Walter
the
Dixon, overwhelming majority of
and
the men
then
went on
on
the
to
second
lead
column,
very
fourth down,
productive,
is Edward
useful
Taylor,
lives
living
back
in
their
Albany,
communities.
but born in Hartford, Washington County,
accountants,
which is where
dentists,
my family, my
medical
paternal family,
doctors,
lived for generations.
civil servants,
And they still live in that
entertainers,
area,
et cetera, et
et
cetera, et cetera.
They arrived there after the American Revolution. George
So
Russell
that's the
Walker
program.
was born in Catskill. If anybody has any questions,
The
I'd
third
be more than
column,
happy to
including
answer
Captain
them. Ranulph Compton,
So
a
just
white
let me
man.
know.
These men all lived in Saratoga Springs. So
Thank
can
you
see
very
that
much,
Saratoga
Richard. That,
Springs had
wow.
quite a number of
That's
men
an awful
in
lot
this
of amazing
regiment.
people that
And
were
again, they were
connected
also in
upstate
Company C.
and went off to do such wonderful things.
Now, these are men from
Wow,
other
and
communities. We
gave
have
their
William
lives.
Vedder, Carl Vroman,
I
Harrison
had a
Vroman.
question.
They were from Schoharie. Roy Baker was
The
from Rensselaer.
soldiers were African
I have a little bit on
American.
Roy Baker a little bit
Were
later.
their officers white?
Pleasant Rao from Troy.
That's a very good
Hullicus from Catskill.
Adrian.
His
So,
great-grandfather was in the
when the
Civil
regiment
War.
was
Harrison
formed-
Vroman's grandfather was in the Civil
well,
War.
the quick answer, yes, there were about
etc.
6 black officers in the
So you
regiment.
had 48 men and one
Okay.
officer.
What
from
happened
the
was,
North Country
in the Army,
this
you have to follow
regiment.
regulations. To be an officer, you have to pass an officer's
Now,
test.
Let's
There
talk
were
about
not
the Vromans
many
and
men
William Vedder.
qualified who could pass an
On the
officer's
left
test.
is an AI image.
Lieutenant Europe
a married couple.
He did pass
The man on the
officer's
left
test and
is
became
Cornelius
an
Thibaut.
officer.
The woman on the right is Maria.
One officer was
a
left
Schoharie
behind to create
Indian woman.
an ersatz
Cornelius Thibaut
battalion
served in
of the
this
militia
regiment during the American
back in New York
Revolution
City.
and was part of the Sugar Bush raid that
Other
occurred
black
here in Delaware
officers
County.
of the regiment.
In August
He
of
married
1918, again a
General
woman
Pershing
of the
came to the
Schoharie
decision
tribe, which was an
that
amalgamation
regiments
of
will black regiments will
Mohawk
either have
and
all white
Lenape
or
and
all black
Pekin.
officers.
They had
feeling
several
being
villages up and down the
that
Schoharie
a
River.
black officer in a white regiment would not
And
receive the respect
they
of the
married.
men.
They were part of the Dutch
But
Reformed Church
in
the
the black
Schoharie
regiment,
which records are
it
still
would not be
extant.
unusual for there to
And
be
they
white
had
officers,
descendants in
'cause
both
that's
the
just
Civil
structure
War
of the Army at
and
the time.
in World War I.
So,
two pictured here,
all but Jim
include
Europe
Private
were
Harrison
transferred
Vroman
to the
and
370th
William Vedder,
Regiment, which was a sister
and there's a
regiment
little newspaper article from the Schoharie
one.
newspaper.
And when they got
that
back
talks
to the
about William
States, they
Vedder's
all
being wounded,
got back
and
together,
that he has
lived their
returned
lives
home.
and,
And when they say
at the bottom,
he was
Marshal
awarded the
Bonaparte,
Distinguished Service
Napoleon
Cross,
Bonaparte Marshal
that
was
really
one.
references what the
Lincoln
so-called
Reed was
the
one.
Croix de Guerre.
There were about
the
6
French
men
Cross of War,
who were
it's the
officers
equivalent
with
of
the
our
regiment
Bronze Star in the American
that
Army.
ended up being transferred
So
out
these are two
towards
descendants
the end of the war.
Cornelius Thibaut and Maria.
Did some of the men who served in World War I end up in World
Again,
War II as well?
After the war,
Another great
men came home.
one, yeah.
They created
Master
a
Sergeant
new post.
Chauncey Hooper,
They were originally
who
part
served
of,
with the
of
regiment in
another
World War
Albany
I because
post,
the
but when they
regiment's
got enough
commander during
members,
World
they
War
were
Chauncey
able
Hooper.
to create their own
A
post.
reporter who had
And
met
it
the
was
men in
named
France in
Warlord
World War
Spencer
I,
Post.
interviewed
And
the
this
same
is,
unit during World War
from,
II, and there he spotted many men
just months
who had
after
served,
the war
who
ended.
he had personally
And
met 20 years
The
earlier.
Albany Argus newspaper had many articles
yes.
about local
Amazing.
men
That's
of
amazing.
this regiment and company
Let's
that
see, I
served
have a
in
couple
World
of
War
other
I.
questions, but I'm just trying to see, I don't think I see
When
any.
the regiment returned
questions
back to
here,
Long Island
let
before
me
being
just double check.
discharged, and after their famous
But
parade up
if
Fifth
people
Avenue
want to
on Lincoln's
unmute
birthday,
themselves
1919, these are
and,
men, these are sergeants rather, of the
um,
redoubtable Company C,
also
369th.
open up their
And
videos, they
fortunately,
can
they're all identified.
talk
And this
directly
is just
with
a
Richard.
sample
So
the
I
young men
encourage anybody
of
who would
our
like
area
to
that served
ask
in the regiment.
a question
Now, of course,
directly. You
Company
don't have to
C had
filter it
men
through
from
me
other
or,
states and other parts of
or
New York,
wait, just
but a good
just
uh,
sing out,
about
just
a
unmute
third
yourself
of the company were men from
and
Albany.
start speaking. Is there anybody out there that wants to ask a question?
Now,
of
this is the
Richard?
man who organized them at
Mm.
Saratoga Springs, Captain Ranulph Compton.
I just
He
want
had
to make
served
a
in the
comment
Second New York
that
National
I was
Guard.
surprised to
He was
see
stationed at the Mexican border.
video footage,
and
moving pictures.
He was put on
from
reserve
World War
list
I.
after he
That
returned
really
from
surprised
Mexico.
me.
But in
Yes,
1918, pardon
I'm
me,
not
sorry,
surprised. Well,
1917,
first of
in
all,
April,
the American Army
he was
had
called
called
back
the
to
Signal
active
Corps,
duty, where
and
he
you can go on the
organized
National
and trained
Archives
the Company
website
C.
and type in 369.
He went with the regiment to France. He
The
served
other
with
black
the regiment
regiments, other
in
white
France
regiments,
up
and
until
there are
April,
they made
when he
movies. They shot footage.
transferred to a tank unit.
What was really
the tank
exciting
corps,
was
and he was a hero
the French
at the Battle
archives
of San
had
Miel
that front line
later
footage
in the war. The
But this is a
cinema
nice
footage
portrait
of America.
of Captain
They were
Major
all, while
Ranulph
they were
Compton
doing garrison
of
duty
Saratoga
or in
Springs.
rare
He later
areas
became the
of
military
war.
secretary
The
to
French
the then
footage,
governor
they're
of
right,
New York
they're right
State.
up there in the combat zone. So it's very exciting because you see
Now, before the
how
men
the
shipped
are
out,
acting, how
there
they're
were
interacting,
deaths
what they're
in
wearing,
the regiment.
the whole milieu
This
is
is
well,
the
they say a picture's
record
worth
of
1,000
William
words.
Helicus.
So moving pictures.
William
worth a
Helicus
million.
was part of the extended Mondor family of the Prattsville, Roxbury
I was
area.
impressed with the
And
the
this is a little
quality
detail of the Prattsville
of the
map,
images of
and
the
it
films.
shows
I
what was
thought that
called
they
the
were like,
Sippy
oh my
Place.
God, you know, almost
That
like
was
just
his
yesterday.
his
Right,
ancestral
right.
grandmother,
Right,
Sophia Helicus,
That was
nicknamed
interesting.
Sippy.
Are there
And
any other
William was living in
questions?
Catskill.
Anybody?
He was the great grandson of
Yes?
Sippy.
Yeah, hi, this
Uh,
is Paul up here.
He was a grandson of Alexander Helicus, a Civil War
There were two
veteran,
things I thought might be
and
interesting
a
if Rich could address
grandnephew
them. One is
of another
in
Helicus,
talking
who was at
about black
Galveston,
officers.
Texas, on
General
June
Pershing
19,
earned the nickname Black Jack
1865, which of course has given us
as a
Juneteenth.
consequence of commanding black
So
troops.
military
And I was wondering if you
tradition
could
run
expound on that a
long
little bit.
in
And
that
the
family.
second was Henry
Now, the thing
Johnson's
about William was
award
people
was
assumed he
upgraded to the Medal
died
of
in
Honor a
training
number of
camp,
years ago.
which is not the
And I thought
case.
that might be an
If you
interesting
look his records
upgrade as
up
well.
on Ancestry.com,
Certainly.
you'll see
I'm
that he
glad you
died
brought
in
up both of
Willsboro,
those.
New York,
First of all,
on the 6th of September,
Black Jack
1917.
Pershing's original nickname
Willsboro
was the N-word
is in that
Pershing,
little dotted
because he
area
commanded
on the
a
map
black regiment
on the
out
left,
west as a younger
and
officer.
it's
But
above
the papers thought that that would not be
Ticonderoga, Port
appropriate
Henry,
in
and before you get to
articles, so they
Plattsburgh.
changed that word to
Black.
black. The company was
And that's how
divided
it became
into
Black Jack
platoons,
Pershing.
and the
He had
platoons
great
were
respect
guarding
for
railroad
black troops.
bridges.
He was
which
of the
were deemed
opinion
to
that
be
black
key
troops,
points of
if
potential
properly
sabotage
officered
by the enemy,
were wonderful soldiers. Now, of course,
This is a
we knew
picture
that
of
from
World War II,
lessons
folks, of the Civil
including
War and the
William's,
Spanish-American War.
So
cousin,
one of the
Charles
the
Helicus,
mythologies of this
cousin of the
period
following
that
generation
has sprung up
Charles Helicus,
is that
and
Americans
Charles
or
Helicus
the army didn't
see
think
that
black
at the
men
bottom
would
in
fight.
the middle.
Total
And
hogwash.
he lived in Hunter.
Everybody knew
And when I gave a Mondor program a couple of years ago,
from
people
the
who
American
knew him
Revolution all the way down
expressed
to
the fact
War.
that
So
they had known him.
the army was segregated
very
because
proud
its
to have
officer
known him
corps
and
was
his
predominantly Southern of their military traditions that we were
So,
probably
of course,
all familiar with.
New York,
the U.S. Army,
so
rather, in its wisdom,
Pershing
decided to
had
send the
nothing but
regiment
high
down with the
praise for black
27th
troops,
Division of New York
and
State,
he
which consisted of other New
knew
York State
Hayward
National
and
Guard
he was
regiments,
very
and they
familiar
sent them
with this-
down
this
into
regiment.
the hotbed.
By the way,
of
the band of this
Jim
regiment
and
was
secession of a
considered to be
generation
the best
earlier
U.S. Army band
down
of the
at
entire war.
Spartanburg
Of all the
South Carolina.
hundreds of regiments that served, including many black
Unlike
regimental
most
bands.
histories that
This
talk
was
about
considered
this
the best.
time,
Now,
the
about Henry
town
Johnson,
generally welcomed them.
I'm glad
the
you brought
mayor,
that up.
The
So,
Chamber of
the
Commerce
man that
welcomed
welcomed them
these men.
Henry
However,
Johnson was a very
There were rednecks
mild
who
man.
did not
He
welcome them.
delivered
And there
coal
were
in Albany
several
going house to
incidents,
house. He was not a red cap porter.
racially
That's
motivated.
another myth.
On the whole, however, they were welcomed.
People just made
in this
assumptions
community
that he was from
because they were,
Albany and
you
he was
know,
a red cap porter.
troops serving
He
the United
delivered
States.
coal for a living. He was
One
from
day,
North Carolina.
Noble
He
Sissel
spoke
went
with a
into a
North
local
Carolinian
hotel to
accent.
get a New York paper.
He was
You know,
assured by
if you think of Mark
Twain
Black
books,
community
you know,
member,
the,
that,
the
no, it's okay,
Southern
you can go to the
dialect by
paper.
both blacks and whites.
Well, when Noble
is
Sister
quite
walked into the
different than
hotel,
northern dialects.
the
So
hotel
he
proprietor
did his heroic
said,
deed
"Get
with
the hell
one
out,
Needham
you
Roberts.
blankety blank." Kicked him
He
in
was
the
severely
rear end.
wounded.
And
He chose to stay with the regiment
New York
rather than being
officer,
discharged.
a white officer from another
And,
regiment,
he
was
became
reading
sort of the icon
in the
of the
lobby. He
regiment.
saw that. He got up and
Its
he
most famous
accosted
member,
the
certainly,
hotel
next
owner.
to along
Other
with
white New
Jim
Yorkers
Europe.
came to the hotel and were
But
threatening to tear it down.
As time
When,
went on and he got back to the
Lieutenant
States,
James
the legend
Europe,
began
Jim
to
Europe
grow.
came in,
He
called everybody to
defeated
attention,
40
and quelled
Germans.
the
He killed
disturbance.
30 of them.
But
He,
there
there was
of
money
Southern
raised
troops
to buy
and
a
Northern
house.
black troops
There were
encamping together.
handlers.
The regiment
or
was
grifters
immediately sent
that attached
overseas.
themselves to him that siphoned off his money.
And because of that, they
he
were the
was
first
under the
100,000
care of a manager
arrive
who
in
booked
France.
him
Now,
talking tours, lecture
on the right
tours around the
is
country.
the
And
little remembrance of
in one
an
account,
English boy
Henry,
what
and he
arrived
talks about
in
the
a
Yanks
Midwestern
and who are the
place,
Yanks.
with a suit.
He says,
and
you
a
know,
bowler
the Yanks
hat
are,
with big
or
fat cigar
everybody,
sticking out of his
the
mouth.
English,
and
the
he
French,
was,
there's some of this,
he was
there's some
playing
of
the
that.
part
There
of
are
a
black
celebrity
Yanks, there are
kingpin.
white Yanks,
And his
but they're
manager,
all Yanks.
manager was along the lines
And
of
of
Don
course,
King, if
our
folks
great
remember
song
Don
that
King
everybody
of the
knew
boxing
was,
world.
oh,
He was
you
used.
won't come back till it's
He
over,
was
over
used.
there.
Now,
By Cohen.
heroic,
So
brave,
very patriotic,
deserving of the Medal of Honor, 100%. But what we now see
if I
on the
get this
internet
going.
about Henry Johnson is highly mythologized. He these are just a
deserved the
little
Medal of Honor.
snippet, and it was long past overdue for him to receive it.
Of action
if you had
in
any
World
other
War
questions,
I.
I'd be happy to answer them about Henry.
Good. Are there any additional questions? Any other thoughts, comments? Because we're just a little bit after 8 o'clock and there's, yes.
I am going to show one more thing.
Okay.
Back in November of 2020, at Main de Massige, which is a reconstructed or restored,
These are
trenches
trenches
where the
in the
Hellfighters
area.
served. This
And-
helmet was found there.
I'm trying to understand.
Tens of thousands of artifacts have been pulled from there. And the director of that
And
restoration,
the
was
blue
kind
lines
enough
are
to
German
give me this
trenches, the
helmet.
red lines are French
This
trenches.
is a French Adrian
This is
helmet,
90
the type
miles
the Hellfighters
east of
wore for the
Paris.
first several months.
And you can see
in
how
combat.
honeycombed the whole
So I'm
area
not
is.
saying this was worn by a
And understand,
Hellfighter.
we have to take a moment.
I am saying
and
this
get
was
this thing to
a
turn
helmet
off.
in the area where the Hellfighters served. So I'm very privileged
was
to
successful.
hold this piece of history.
So this is the area.
Very
The
interesting.
Argonne
That's
is
fantastic.
to the east.
Well, if
This
there are
is
no
the
other
area of
questions, I just want to
Cham-
say that
Champagne
there's
in French,
more
Champagne in French.
and again,
information about
can
Black
see how
History Month
honeycombed this
activities,
area
and one is taking
with
place at
trenches.
the New York
The
State
forward trenches, the secondary
Museum and
trenches, the
Cultural
communication
Education Center
trenches, the
this
rear
month.
line
It's
trenches,
entitled, it's
trenches
an exhibit
everywhere.
entitled Embattled.
This is a wartime map.
The New York State Archives
this is
and
an
New
area
York
where
State
the
Libraries
369 served.
manuscripts and special
This is
collections
the area
are
called
presenting a
Massige,
joint
and there
display
are
that
French
focuses
trenches
on
all
the
through this
achievements
area.
of Black
The blue
military.
lines are the German trenches.
Lost my page here.
And Ville-sur-Turbe is a little
Black
village there.
military regiments
I have
and their
been
fight
blessed to be
for
able to visit there
equality
twice,
on
most
and
recently
off
with my
the
granddaughter
battlefield.
in
The
last
display
April.
features a variety
These
of
words are called
images,
the,
letters,
in English,
government
boys de
documents,
Hazy.
and other records from the
In
Civil
French,
War, World
Boisy.
War I, and World
And
War
this is the
II
area
eras,
where the
and are
Hellfighters were stationed
showcased on the
2 months
11th floor lobby
this
of the
area,
Cultural Education Center
and
this
then
month.
later
You can go
over
to the
in
State
this
Museum,
area.
NYSM.
So this is a 1915 painting of the Bois de
NYSED.gov.
Zie.
To
The Ferme de
find out
Montplaisir
more
is the
about that
yellow
exhibit.
area on the left.
It looks like it would be very
That,
interesting.
I have a funny story, which I
Well,
won't go into
thank
for
you
in
so
details.
much,
The
Richard,
farm
and
is no
thank you
longer there.
everyone for attending
And
tonight.
I stopped and asked people where the
Stay
farmhouse
tuned
was,
for
and they
more
didn't know what the heck
programs
I
that
was
will be
talking about,
announced in
because
the
it no longer
future. We
stands.
don't have another
But we
Zoom
did figure
coming
out where
up,
it stood.
but there will be
And
other
Henry
in-person
Johnson
programs
and
that
Needham
we're working
Roberts
on that should
were
be
on
very,
station on a
very
listening post
interesting
over in
and
this area.
exciting.
A little
And
village
so
called Mills Court,
stay tuned.
which is now
And
vanished
thank you very
because of
much
disease
for
after
your
the
interest
war.
in this, and thank
And
you very
the,
much, Richard.
Thank you, Adrian. On
so-
or
Thank
in
you,
river
everyone.
flows in this area.
Absolutely. So it's,
But this
I
is the
bid
Bois de
everyone good
Zie
night,
where the
and I
369th was
guess,
stationed.
Jessica, you can end the program.
This is a photograph from 1915.